Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or good night, depending on where you are. My name is Nicole Morris, and I am a professor here at Emory Law, and I'm pleased to bring you the 7th Annual GER Innovation Conference, NFTs, Digital Assets in the Metaverse, What You Need to Know. And I will start off to say what you need to know will be more than what we can provide in the next 3 hours. But we will give you at least a good primer and a good place to start, and to help you along with your journey, no matter where you are on this learning platform, because there's lots to know and there's lots to still know and to be determined by the creators in this space. So before I get to our illustrious speakers and our opening remarks from our NFT artist, I want to queue up a video that was posted on YouTube by Johnny Harris. It's got over 6 million views, and it's a helpful way to get everyone oriented to our topic. Go with the video.
$69 million.
So what's behind this latest craze?
That is the question to ask.
Okay, so there's some super strange stuff happening online right now, and I need to tell you about it. First, look at this tweet. The first tweet ever tweeted in the history of Twitter. The tweet was by Jack Dorsey.
I'm one of the co-founders of Twitter.
And this tweet was somehow just purchased for $2,915,835.47.
You serious?
And it's not just a tweet. Just last month, a single JPEG sold for $69 million.
Oh my God.
The NBA is selling little moments of basketball games for hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is all sorts of digital things that people are purchasing a version of them for lots of money. There are 3 simple letters that you need to understand what's going on here. Those letters are NFT.
All right, that's our teaser for what's to come. And I want to again welcome you to our GER Innovation Conference regarding NFTs, digital assets, and the metaverse. I will quickly give you a brief intro to our speakers. We have basically 2 formats to the conference. We're going to start with NFTs, and our opening speaker, Luis Buenaventura, is here to tell us about his recent success with an auction at Christie's and the work that he's doing. And then we're going to dive into some of the nuts and bolts of NFTs and the transactional aspects of it, and what's to come from our illustrious speakers. And then we'll take a break because we do have a lot of Zoom time today. Around 12:15, we'll break and then return at 12:30 to see how these digital assets and NFTs are being deployed and used in the metaverse, Web 3.0, sometimes people refer to it. And we've got Meta, the company, head licensing attorney here to sort of share some of the work that's going on there, as well as some others from the academia space, as well as attorneys to help frame that out. And then we're going to close out with sort of a combination of what's going on with NFTs in the metaverse and where we see this moving in the future, and take some questions. So to start off, our opening speaker, Luis, is the country manager for the Philippines for Yield Guild Games, which is a startup bringing metaversal income to emerging economies. And he's also the co-founder of BloomX, a licensed cryptocurrency exchange. He's one of the world's first NFT artists with curio cards back in 2017, and he's the first Filipino NFT artist to have his work auctioned off at Christie's. In September of last year, he founded the Crypto Pop Art Guild, which is a decentralized organization specializing on creating sustainable income for underprivileged Filipino artists. So we have his remarks coming shortly, so that should be super exciting. Joining us from the faculty side, the academia side, starting off with Professor Kevin Greene, joining us from the West Coast. Good morning. Professor Greene is the John J. Schumacher Chair and Professor of Law at Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles. Professor Greene joined Southwestern's faculty in 2020, and he is a nationally recognized entertainment an intellectual property law scholar, and an expert witness consultant for copyright, trademark, publicity rights, and entertainment contract disputes. And he is a highly committed and outstanding teacher, as well as a passionate leader and an IP influencer. Professor Kelly Werder joins us from the great state of Florida. Professor Werder is a lecturer at Florida Gulf Coast University, where she teaches in the School of Entrepreneurship with a focus on entrepreneurship and business law. Professor Werder has an extensive experience with intellectual property, and she also has a JD from Suffolk University School of Law in Boston. And she's doing some cool things with her class in the NFT space and is like super active. And she's created something for us today. So I'm going to wait for her to share some of that. All right. Then going to Atlanta, we've got my colleague from across the street, Professor Benn Konsynski. He is the George S. Kraft Professor of Information Systems and Operations Management at the Emory Goizetta School of Business. Professor Konsynski's scholarly focus is in areas of innovation, technology, business, and society at large. Then we have Elizabeth Strickler. Professor Strickler is a senior lecturer and director of entrepreneurship programs in the Creative Media Industries Institute at Georgia State. In these roles, she brings a broad and robust background to both media and technology, leveraging her knowledge in the media industry with design, creativity, and technology to promote innovation and generate media for a variety of platforms. All right, and then we also have, hailing from Morehouse, Dr. Muhsinah Morris. Dr. Morris is the program director for the Virtual Reality Project at Morehouse College. She's also the interim department chair and an assistant professor in chemistry. And she also is an affiliate professor in the Center for Excellence in Education at Morehouse. Girl, you got too many hats. She teaches an advanced chemistry course using virtual reality, which I think is amazing, and is here to talk about all things that she's doing with Morehouse and the Metaverse. All right, that's our academia side of the house. Now switching over to some of our practitioners, we've got Juliana Neelbauer. Juliana is a senior associate at Drew Eckel and Farnham here in Atlanta. Juliana focuses her practice on being a virtual general counsel for some for-profit and non-for-profit charitable trade organizations, as well as high net worth individuals and families who hail from either consumer tech, commercial tech, healthcare, industrial or supply chain, finance, contract, government contracting, and other political action industries. Yeah, that was pretty impressive. We are really pleased to have an in-house person here from Meta, and that person is Shayne O'Reilly. Shayne O'Reilly is head of licensing and open source at Meta, where he leads a team focused on technology transactions, intellectual property licensing, commercial, product, and IP support for M&A, open source, and academic collaborations. Ding, ding, ding. Shayne previously served as Associate General Counsel for IP litigation with Meta, where he managed the domestic and international IP litigation matters. And prior to going in-house, Shayne worked at Kilpatrick, Townsend, and Stockton, where his practice focused on patent litigation, client counseling, technology transactions, due diligence investigations, and patent post-grant review work. And we are making sure I'm getting everybody and not missing anybody. All right, last but not least, we've got our lawyer from Chicago. Welcome. Nelson Rosario is a registered patent attorney in Chicago, and his work focuses on the intersection of law, technology, and society. He also is focused on the practice of providing counseling to clients with general overall legal strategy and their IP strategy. He's worked in some of the following technology areas: AI, cryptocurrency, blockchain, and smart contracts, as well as fintech and business method patents, trading systems, telemedicine, and network and internet communications. So we've got quite a bit of experience from the IP side, from the media side, from the VR side. So I'm super excited to hear what you all have to say. But before we do that, we've got to get to our NFT artists. The reason that all of this hype is created are some of the folks like our next speaker, Luis, and the work that he's doing in the Philippines, but also the work that's happening really everywhere. One of the interesting things about NFTs is it's not an innovation that's kind of started in one geographic area only. It's really exploding simultaneously all over, from art to fashion to music to sports. I've seen some interesting stuff with lawyers trying to put NFTs for contracts and other weird things like that. Maybe I'll make an NFT of my syllabus. Nobody cares about my syllabus. But Luis, tell us your story. I think a lot of folks are really interested in curio cards, so I will just put that as a personal plug. We want to hear about that from you as well. But please, I ask you to take the floor and share your story.
Thanks, Nicole, and thanks so much for having me here. Okay, so as you could probably tell, it's not morning where I am. I'm from the Philippines. It's actually just a little bit past midnight. I have not turned into a pumpkin, so that's the good news. The bad news is that I'm gonna have to kind of regale you with just a personal story, just kind of like how I got started in this space. So I've been in the cryptocurrency industry since Bitcoin was like a few $100s. This is back in 2014. I've been living and working in the Philippines all of my life, and I've been trying to kind of get this stuff to stick in emerging economies like the Philippines. Cryptocurrency is this great high-minded kind of technology, but doesn't really matter so much if it's not helping the people at the base of the pyramid, at least in my opinion. Now, so in 2017, I was a poor startup founder trying to raise money for his business. It was a kind of a Bitcoin kind of remittance-based business, and I was in San Francisco. And the thing is, when you are a poor startup founder in San Francisco, typically you end up in startup meetups. The reason for that is because the pizza and the beer tends to be free. And that means that you can kind of get by that evening without actually having to pay for your meals. And as it happens, every Thursday, there was a Bitcoin meetup in San Francisco. And I still remember the name of the bar. It was the El Rio. And this was long enough ago that Coinbase was still paying for the drinks. So it was just a lifetime ago. And so I was in this Bitcoin meetup, and I was having my free pizza and my free beer and kind of just generally enjoying myself. And a couple of guys came up to me at the bar, and they were Ethereum guys. They were not really Bitcoin guys. They were people who were very deeply interested in this. At the time, it was kind of a newish crypto called Ethereum. Had this whole smart contract thing going on, this whole kind of like, we'll build this decentralized computer and create applications on top of it and stuff like that, right? It's a kind of very, again, high-minded kind of technology that I honestly could not really wrap my head around. So they came up to me and they said, hey, we recognize you from Twitter. Aren't you that guy that keeps making all of these Bitcoin cartoons and kind of posting about, like making little jokey cartoons about Bitcoin and the price and all of that stuff? And indeed I was. At that point, I'd been kind of doing these regular cartoons for just a good couple of months. And I got some decent traction on it. Like, people enjoyed it. It was cute, it was funny. And back then there was basically no standards for crypto art. Like, almost no one was doing it. So anyone who ever wanted to do anything in crypto art, you were instantly Leonardo da Vinci, right? So they remembered me and they said, hey, so we've got this kind of project that we're working on. It's kind of like trading cards, so it's like collectible, but it's all digital. There's no physical version of these cards. But instead of having like the usual stuff that you'll see on trading cards, instead of having, say, your favorite basketball player, your favorite baseball player, your favorite car, instead of all of those things, we want to have art from artists in the crypto world. And that put me in a very unique position because, as I said, there weren't all that many crypto artists in the crypto world back then. I was one of 7 that they had invited into this project. This project was called Curio Cards. Each artist contributed somewhere between 3 and 4 pieces of work to it. And each of those cards would have a certain number of digital copies. And this whole kind of concept to me was just like really strange, right? I was like, okay, sure, whatever. I mean, I was never going to make any money from this work anyway, so just take it. As long as the attribution is there, I'm fine, right? And as it happens, this Curio Cards collection sold absolutely 0 copies. It was amazing. It was kind of possibly the least successful thing I've ever done. And a couple months after this, and remember this story is from 2017. A couple of months after this, I found out that the startup had actually shut down because they couldn't get people to kind of, buy into this concept of these digital trading cards. And like, to be honest, they were only charging a few dollars for each copy. It was like somewhere like in the $3 to $5 range. And they could not get anyone to buy it. It just did so badly that they just kind of shut the whole thing down. So I forget about it, right? I go back to my life. I keep trying to raise money for my startup, and I keep focusing on kind of what we're doing in the Philippines. And in the meantime, kind of 2018, 2019, 2020 rolls around. The NFT art space is becoming bigger and bigger at this point. Like, people are actually starting to care about this stuff. And one morning in March of 2021, so this is like 4 years after the events of 2017 for me, my Twitter direct messages kind of just blow up. And it's all these people who are saying, hey man, aren't you one of the artists in this project called Curio Cards from 2017? Do you have any copies of those cards with you? Do you still own any of those cards? And like, to be perfectly honest, I could not remember for the life of me what the hell that was. So I had to dig through years of emails to try to establish exactly what Curio Cards even were. And when I saw it, I vaguely remembered these Ethereum guys in El Rio, in San Francisco, while I was having free pizza and free beer. And I was like, oh yeah, it was these guys that, kind of shut down their startup. And so the reason why these folks had kind of been DMing me on Twitter was because it turns out that Curio Cards was the world's first NFT art collection. Provably so, because it was on the blockchain. And the nice thing about the Ethereum blockchain is that for as long as it exists, you can check the timestamps on anything that is on there, and you can verify when it was actually created. And there were a couple of things that were very interesting about this, right? So the first was that, yes, it was very provable that we were the oldest NFT art project on Ethereum. The second thing that was very easy to prove was that the artists had never been paid for their work, because there were no transactions going out of kind of the wallet that was supposed to accumulate the sales. And then there was no transactions at all, actually. So those two things were quite interesting. So what I found out during that weekend where I was trying to just dig all this stuff up was that someone else had kind of done some blockchain forensics and unearthed the fact that Curio Cards was the world's first NFT art collection. And it had blown up in the sense that everyone wanted to get a copy. So those $3 or $4 cards that they were trying to sell back in 2017, they were now worth a couple $100. And I was like, oh, hey, that's kind of cool. Like, I like money just like any other person, generally speaking. And it was kind of cool that, kind of work that I'd completely forgotten about from many years ago was suddenly very valued. So an entire community started to kind of build around Curio Cards, where, so a couple things that were very deeply interesting about all this, right? Like the original founders of the company had to come back because they were no longer working together. And they had to dust off the old code. They had to remind themselves what this project was even about. But thankfully, they were deeply incentivized by the value of the cards to try to make it all work. And they did. And they established that because the artists had never been paid, that was the first thing they had to do. They had to make sure that all the artists got paid properly according to the original agreement, which was, by the way, possibly the best deal I've ever made in my life. It was like 99% of the revenue was to the artists. which is usually the reverse of kind of like a lot of NFT projects these days. It's usually kind of 1% or, like just a small amount usually ends up with the artist these days. So, okay, so I had a couple things going for us, right? It was like, that was pretty cool. I like making a little bit of extra money that I wasn't expecting. That's always great. But what happened over the next few months was the part that really blew my mind. Because the Curio Cards project was so unique. And by the way, like when we say something is 4 years old, in the traditional art world, that's nothing, right? I mean, like, it's hardly a Da Vinci. It's hardly a Picasso. It's barely even a Banksy, to be honest. And but in crypto world, 4 years old is basically, that's like Stonehenge, right? It was basically when it all began. So it wasn't just the small community that had unearthed Curio Cards that found it valuable. It was like this whole community of this burgeoning community of NFT collectors that all wanted to get a piece of this stuff. And I, kind of at the height of it, I was seeing single editions of my cards going for $15,000 a piece. And I was to say that I found that odd would be a pretty vast understatement. It was very odd. It was very odd to kind of see that happening. Now, at this point, the artists had all come back. As you can imagine, if your work is starting to sell at kind of prices like this, I mean, you got to believe that everyone comes back, right? Because, I mean, of course you will. So we had to create an entire new Discord community for this. We had an OpenSea page where you can kind of see all of the trades happening. OpenSea is one of the biggest marketplaces for NFTs on the internet. And, over time, we ended up with a total sales volume of about 35,000 Ethereum. That comes out to the kind of the highest price of Ethereum. That's about nearly $140 million. Again, very, very unexpected amounts considering how we basically just did this by accident, right? I mean, or at least I did, right? I mean, for me, it was a complete accident. I did not live in San Francisco. I'm not from the United States. I happened to be there for a 3-week business trip at the time. So it was miraculous chaos that kind of made us. I will say that I'm not like a multi-millionaire. I should mention that at this point, kind of the total sales volume of OpenSea for the Curio Cards project that is generated by traders buying from other traders. So it was not kind of being bought from the artist at that point. So I do not have $140 million. Please do not try to find my home address. Now, what else happened to us in that same year? We ended up in Christie's. So Christie's is the world's oldest auction house. It's about 450 years old. Kind of amongst the things that, kind of we know of Christie's, Bill Gates once spent $30 million in a Christie's auction to buy Leonardo da Vinci's notebook. So this is the place where you go for stuff that is absolutely unique. And one day, I believe it was October 1st of 2021, so it was like about 6 or 7 months after Curio Cards had been unearthed. One day, a complete collection of Curio Cards, the entire set is only 30 pieces. An entire collection of Curio Cards was auctioned off there for $1.3 million. Now, here's the part that's really interesting about that number. Well, two things that were really interesting. One is that it was actually sold for Ethereum. So it was actually, kind of a milestone for Christie's because that was the first time that ever sold anything in exchange for a cryptocurrency. And that cryptocurrency was not Bitcoin. It was Ethereum. So that was kind of an interesting milestone just on its own. Secondly, when it sold for $1.3 million, we thought it was underpriced. So this is kind of this is where we're at, right? In terms of kind of how spoiled NFT artists have become in the space of literally 6 or 7 months, where we think that when something gets sold for a little over $1 million, they got a bargain on that. That was a steal. Now, about a few weeks after that, we debuted another collection of Curio Cards at Sotheby's, which is kind of the opposing oldest auction house. That sold for about $700,000. So, as you can imagine, everyone was like, what the heck? That was the cheapest, set ever, $700,000. What a steal. That's impossible, right? Like no one is ever gonna ever pay that little again. Obviously, my opinions on this are very colored by the fact that I had no idea where this money was coming from. Now, what have I done with all of this stuff? It's like, firstly, I think the first thing I should probably express, because I'm in front of all of you and we're talking about this, we're trying to be as objective as we possibly can about this story. There is an overwhelming need, at least for me personally, to make sure that this money or the resources that I've kind of found via Curio Cards, I don't want it to go to waste. So what I've done with it, and this is the part where I'm kind of going into the end of the talk now. I'm sorry if it was a little bit long. I've redirected it towards this thing called the CryptoPop Art Guild. What that is an organization for underprivileged Filipino artists. What we're trying to do is we're trying to look for Filipino artists who are not kind of well known yet. They don't really have an art career yet. What we're trying to do is get them up to the point where they can actually sell their art as NFTs. We're going to teach them the ropes. We do these bi-weekly just art workshop sessions, and then we're kind of hooking them up. This month, we're hooking them up with our first big NFT project that we're all going to work on together. There's 200 of us, so it's not a small guild by any means. We were able to find 200 underprivileged Filipino artists just from across the country. I've never met any of them in real life. We talk on Zoom or on Facebook Live. That's basically it. And the goal right now is to use as many of the resources that I can muster to put people on a same kind of trajectory where, I mean, it's hard to replicate what happened with Curio Cards because you're never going to have another first NFT art project in the world, right? That's never going to happen again. But I think that there is enough miraculous chaos out there, particularly in the crypto world, that we can continue to try to just put people in the path of some of that lucky randomness, that positive randomness. And that's what we're trying to do here. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to end up I might end up disappointing 200 people, right? But I think that we're at a moment in time where suddenly artists that are from countries like the Philippines, which is not exactly on the map when it comes to kind of the global traditional art scene, we now have a shot because no one cares what country you're actually from. No one really cares what language you speak necessarily, as long as the art is good, and as long as you're able to kind of represent yourself in a way that is compelling. So it has this weird effect of democratizing the art industry in a way that no other technology has been able to do before, and it's a singular moment, and I'm very hopeful that this stuff will actually kind of change a few lives, or at least open up opportunities for people that they would never have had otherwise. So I've been lucky that it wasn't just my own money that I put into the guild. Like when I started telling my friends about it, I ended up raising way more money than I thought I would, just because there were a lot of people that believed in the vision too. So I ended up kind of getting all sorts of grants from other startups or other individuals who just kind of wanted to throw a little bit of money into the bag just so there would be more resources to go around. So I mean, I was initially expecting to have 50 artists in the guild, and we kind of overshot it by a couple 100%. So good sign that people believe in the mission at the very least. So yeah, that's it. I didn't really have a conclusion for this. It was more like I just wanted to kind of share kind of how I got here. And what kind of the next few goals are. So other than my own guild, I'm trying to work with other traditional Filipino artists and kind of help them find their footing in the NFT space. And that's all happening in real time as we're talking. So yeah, it's super exciting. And thanks so much for listening to the to my story.
That was amazing. Miraculous chaos is going to be one of our, drop that in the in the chat and Q&A. Already saw a comment about branding it, so you might want to get in front of that one if you really like that term. Yeah, I think your comment, and I want to be very appreciative of your time, so I'm not going to hold you till 2 o'clock in the morning. I think your comment about democratizing the art world is perfect. To me, that's the biggest blessing of NFTs and what it is doing in terms of this disruptiveness to the art industry and how it's been operating, but the democratizing of who has opportunities to participate is absolutely fantastic. I have 2 questions, and then I also want to give our panelists, our fellow speakers, because I think everyone has some interesting plays on what's going on here. And we'll take some questions. If you have questions from the audience, put it in Q&A so we can start reading those out and pulling those together. I'm going to save my first question for the second question. You don't know what they are, but I do. So I've been reading a lot. So remember, I'm coming from the legal side about a lot of fraud with NFTs, right? Theft and fraud, right? So in preparing for today, there's like 2 camps. Literally, the literature is almost divided 50-50. There's a lot of pro, right? Here's what's great, here's who's doing what, here's the celebrities getting involved. And then there's a lot of cons, environmental, people are getting scammed, fraud. So and not knowing, there's really no singular source of truth. It's kind of a mix of both. But what are your concerns, and how do you, as you bring in folks in the guild, how do you help them think about protecting their art?
Right. Yeah, sure. Okay. As it happens, this is the kind of conversation that I have a lot on Twitter these days because, yeah, there's a lot of concerns. And generally speaking, on Twitter, there are more concerns than kind of well-wishers. Let's just say that. Yeah, so how do people protect their art with NFTs? So the first thing I will probably say to people is that the NFT technology as a concept was never meant to act as DRM. That's not really kind of what it's trying to solve for. So when I say DRM, I mean digital rights management. So kind of, it's not trying to lock down the copying of your work, because people can still copy your work even if it's an NFT. They can still say stuff like, hey, I have this JPEG of someone's NFT. Now I own this JPEG. I mean, they can still say silly things like that. What the NFT actually is, and the thing that I always try to explain to people is, it is a representation of ownership. It's kind of like a deed of sale in something. It's a digital deed of sale. So what rights are afforded to the buyer of an NFT? Well, the main thing is that they now have the right to resell it and reprice it at any price or at any time that they see fit, because they own it. It doesn't give them commercial rights necessarily. That's usually kind of something else entirely. But generally speaking, all you get when you buy an NFT from an artist such as myself is you have the right to sit on it, wait for its value to appreciate, and possibly at some point in the future, resell it to someone else and realize a profit. Now, that is exactly the same as a lot of traditional art, because just because you bought that Banksy does not mean you can make t-shirts out of it. You still need to have Banksy's permission if you want to use it commercially. However, you can resell that Banksy to anyone else. You don't need his permission to do that. So that's kind of where we're at with kind of how this stuff works. How do you protect your work from it? So there's no perfect answer here, because there are a lot of stories of small artists, of which I still consider myself one of those artists, who will create art, and then a couple weeks later will realize that someone else has taken a screenshot of my NFT, and then they're now reselling it somewhere else. And they're pretending either that they're me, or they're pretending that it was their work. Now, the reason why I even found out about it is because the community has a pretty strong self-policing kind of tendency where, there's a lot of people out there who are just kind of scouring these marketplaces. And when they spot something that is kind of familiar or whatever, they'll usually kind of call it out, right? So I've had a lot of work stolen over the last year or so, but none of it has actually been sold, because typically as soon as you report kind of an NFT as being of a stolen image or piece of art, the marketplaces will take it down pretty quickly. Because that's basically the single largest thing that they're trying to avoid, right? They don't want people to be able to get away with, kind of making money off of other people's work. So that's kind of, it's not a perfect answer. And certainly when we say that the community polices itself, there's a lot of problems inherent in that. But it is what's working right now. Yeah, I imagine this is all a work in progress too, because this stuff is just so new. So I imagine there's still going to be so many changes and improvements over the coming years.
Absolutely. No, I think that's right. And folks like myself and other lawyers will get involved, and regulators will get involved, and it'll look different, 5 years, 4 years, maybe even a year from now than it does today. All right, my last selfish question as moderator. What advice do you have, right? I think this is a good one to sort of leave, your parting thoughts with the group. But what advice do you have to others? We've got students, undergrads, maybe even some high school students here. If you're in high school, shout us out. You should be in school right now. I don't know how I feel about that if you are in high school. Who are definitely, particularly the college students, are really into NFTs right now. So what advice would you give to someone just trying to crack in, and they may not, due to the time difference, be able to join your guild, but they need help?
Sure. Okay. So I guess there's two classes of people here, right? So it's the artists and then the collectors. For the artists, there's a particular recipe that seems to work quite well. The first is that you have to have uniqueness, and the second is that you have to have reach. And if you have those two things in combination, you'll usually do well as an NFT artist. Now, what do I mean by uniqueness? It could be that your art style is just really unique. Or it could be that there's something about your narrative, your personal story, that is very unique. In the case of curio cards, I wouldn't say that my art style is very unique. I mean, I'm kind of like a comic book kind of illustrator, so it's not super unique, but the story was, right? And that makes it kind of very hard to replicate. And then the second thing that you need is reach, and that is a function of how visible you are on Twitter. Are you followed by the correct people? And by correct people, I usually mean, are you followed by the NFT art community? Do they know who you are? If you don't exist to the NFT art community, you will probably have a hard time selling anything, because they need social validation before they will, pluck down a couple $1,000s on a JPEG, right? So they need to have some way to verify that you're a real person, that you are going to continue to work within this community, and you're not just there to do a quick cash grab, which is kind of one of the the biggest criticisms that get levied at newcomers, right? I mean, you guys just want to make some money off of us. And it's valid. There is quite a lot of cash grabbing going on right now. It is what happens when an industry does well. Now, if you're a collector, my advice is going to be a little bit more vague, because I think that collectors have the hardest time of anyone, because there's so many things changing with NFTs on a weekly basis. It used to be just an Ethereum thing, but now it's on Binance Smart Chain, it's on Tezos, now it's on Solana. All of these other blockchains now have their own variations of these marketplaces. And some marketplaces support multiple versions of these blockchains. And it's really deeply confusing, right? It's very hard to tell where to even begin. So my only real practical advice here is, if you are starting out and you really want to learn, what you should do, I think, is you earmark a certain amount of money that you are willing to learn with. And when I say learn with, I mean lose. because you are very likely going to screw up and likely lose that money. So if it's a couple $100, then just do that and then make your decisions accordingly, right? If you can find an NFT that is worth 10, 15 bucks, that's probably not going to be on the Ethereum blockchain for sure. That's probably going to be on Solana or one of the smaller ones like Tezos. Then work with your budget, right? And see what you can learn from that. See if you can figure out how this stuff works based on direct experience. I should also mention that there are two distinct categories for this stuff. I tend to kind of work in the NFT art sector, and then there's also an NFT collectible sector. And those are different because with the collectibles, these are the ones that, like, if you've ever seen those, that they call them bored apes. So there's kind of these images of apes that are all kind of slightly different, right? And each one is slightly unique. So bored apes, that's an example of NFT collectibles. Cyberpunks is another one. CryptoPunks is another one. There's a whole bunch of them. That's very, very popular. The reason why that's different is because those have entire communities built around them. You have to integrate into their Discord servers or their Telegram groups, and you have to get to know the community if you want to do this stuff well. With the NFT art side, that's more like art for art's sake. And that's kind of where I am a little bit more familiar. That is not as community driven, although there is still a community side of it. It's just not as community driven as the collectible stuff. And the tendency with the art side is that the rules that apply for traditional art have a tendency to also apply for NFT art. So if you know how to sell your paintings in real life, you've probably already solved for about half of the effort to kind of get into NFTs. Of course, every person will have a slightly different journey, and there's certainly a learning curve. And I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna be painful at the beginning. But yeah, it's such an interesting journey, and I think that even if it is not for you, I think that you'll learn a lot just by looking into it a little bit more directly. So earmark $100, $200, whatever it is, just play around with it, see what happens. But if you lose it, please don't bill me because I did warn you.
That's super fun. Perfect.
Thank
perfect.
you.
Nothing you hear today is financial advice.
That's right.
CYO.
So I want to open up. I'm going to look in the Q&A. Anyone on the panel, any of our speakers, do you have any questions for, we'll just Bill Nicole Morris. Any questions for Luis before we let him go to sleep?
I was just looking at curio cards, and I cannot believe, the price is incredible, but the art is incredible. Like, it's really amazing. It's I'm sad that I didn't find it in 2017 when I had Ethereum sitting around because I was done buying crypto kitties and I just didn't have anything else to do with it. So it's amazing, and I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I'm excited to see where you go with CryptoPop.
I also want to thank Luis for joining us. This is Juliana, and I want to ask you what your thoughts are about the debate around long-term licensing fee triggers for artists in the smart contract so that you can get a piece of the secondary, tertiary, infinite down the chain sale and really create an estate perpetually for your entire family with additional proceeds being automatic. Where do you fall on that?
No, so I am an artist, and I would like it if there was residual income from my work in perpetuity. That would be wonderful. So a couple of marketplaces have versions of this. The one that I have the most experience with is called Maker's Place, and there is a 10% royalty fee kickback that gets automatically dispersed to the artist every time the work gets resold. And that's automatic. And I can tell you that there is no greater feeling in the world than waking up to an email that you just got a 10% kickback on art that you sold like a year ago. That is a great feeling because typically the buyer, the second person who has bought it, has paid an amount that is larger than the original purchase price. So you kind of make a little bit of extra on that too. So it's great. It's a wonderful feeling. Many marketplaces are starting to implement similar things. OpenSea has somewhere between, I think you can define it, it's somewhere between 2 and 5%. So it's smaller, but it's not nothing. And certainly, I would love it if, you know, kind of we could do these things a little bit more across the board. Unfortunately, one of the things you have to know about the royalty fees is it's not actually smart contract based. And that, I guess, speaks to your point. What I mean by that is it is not actually automatic. The platform itself is kind of doing the kind of, you know, the sussing out of the accounting. And it would be great if you could do it as a smart contract, because that means that it won't even matter where the sale is happening. It could happen anywhere and I'll still get kickback. So that's what's missing.
That's the
Yeah,
one
that's what's missing.
that I think we're, 'cause these platforms can get purchased, or, you know, they fail themselves. And then that promise for that future where the artists get paid down the chain, you know, dissipates in that moment or disappears. Tell me also, on a technical level, as an artist engaging in a technical realm that's new, what about the platform itself and the protocols themselves excites you that you can do more as an artist with this?
Yeah, sure. So I actually have a bit of a software engineering background. So like I know quite a bit about how to write, you know, JavaScript and Ruby and PHP and stuff like that. So I would love if I could design NFTs that actually are programmatic in some way, where, so just as a silly example, if I wanted to create a landscape that changes kind of depending on the daytime, the kind of daytime or nighttime or seasonally or stuff like that, I would love it if it actually ran that way, you know, kind of regardless of what platform it was on. That's not currently possible. There are a couple of marketplaces that are trying to do these programmatic NFTs, but kind of you have to work with very simple tools there. So not quite there. Yeah, so I think there's still a long way to go, but that's great though. Like, I think that we're very much at day one, stage one here. And I think that, you know, kind of the more open we are to kind of trying out new things and, you know, kind of possibly making fools of ourselves when we try out new things and then fail, then, you know, that's how innovation happens. You have to be willing to kind of make a fool of yourself to some extent, right? So yeah, I'm super excited about all of it.
Are there any pet projects of yours other than the one mentioned at the beginning that you are in development that you want us to all be tuned to and to support?
Yeah, so there's one that I'm not supposed to talk about yet, but it's kind of like a national painting. Like it's a painting by a national artist here in the Philippines. It's kind of like one of the Philippines' most well-known paintings. And the National Museum has given us permission to NFT it. So that's kind of the weirdest collaboration I'm ever gonna do in my entire life, just because I've never collaborated with an artist that was dead and like has been dead for nearly 100 years. So that's kind of an interesting one. Yeah, so those things are kind of like, those are the areas that I'm most interested in. Like, see how far you can push the boundaries of this stuff. I'm probably gonna end up I'm already kind of the subject of a lot of Twitter flames right now, because people are not super into NFTs because of the environmental impact or some other reason, right? So I imagine if I did something that was kind of very like a legacy painting from Philippine history, that would be kind of very controversial. But I'm here for it. Like I want to see how far we can take this stuff. It's just going to be so exciting to see.
We'll be following.
Great.
Thanks.
I'm gonna give Professor Greene the last word, and we'll let you slide off to your nighttime dreams here. But thank you, Luis, for staying on. Professor Greene.
First of all, this is great. I mean, it was awesome to hear your story, and congrats on all your success. I just wanted to ask you, in terms of the original artwork you did you retain all rights to those works? And if you did, what do you foresee doing with it? I mean, you could make adaptations, you could do all sorts of stuff. Is that part of the vision?
So I did retain all of the rights. However, I chose not to exercise them. So this is kind of the only version of those original kind of pieces from 2017 that you can currently buy. And that was kind of by design, in the sense that, like, a part of this stuff is it is about scarcity. to a certain extent. Argue whether or not the scarcity is artificial here, but like let's just say that if I turned it into mugs and t-shirts and stuff like that, like it probably wouldn't make a dent in kind of the revenue that the project had already generated at that point. Generally speaking, no matter what the NFT art that you put out there is, the artist usually does retain all of the rights to it. But you are kind of incentivized not to keep reproducing it because you're trying to kind of make the existing versions of those NFTs as scarce and therefore possibly as valuable as possible. However, there are a lot of projects out there that really like remixing stuff, and that's completely okay. So they'll take kind of other artists' projects and kind of like mash them up and kind of make something completely new out of it. From Curio Cards, like Curio Cards has spawned like a whole bunch of these other side projects that are all kind of variations of the cards that we made. That's totally fine with us. Like we have no issue with that because it's very share and share alike, which is kind of one of those Creative Commons types licenses that that people tend to kind of throw around, right? It's like, yeah, totally, take it, do what you want with it, attribute it to us, but other than that, do what you will with it because it's on the internet, man. So like, and we've certainly been financially rewarded enough at this point that like I'm happy for people to just take it and remix it and do something even cooler with the work.
Wow, that is amazing. I'm gonna give you a round of applause. That was like phenomenal. My conference administrator, she's like, we're kind of running behind, but like you incorporated in your remarks so many tidbits of what we were hoping to tease out in this first 45 minutes or so that I am super appreciative. This was amazing. I'm totally going to follow you. I think you might be my first NFT purchase since now I know. Now I know I got to get my coins together, but now I know. I can't play with the Bored Ape Yacht Club people, so I know where I can't play.
That's a little bit outside my price range as well.
You're getting a lot of love in the chat, so I'll be sure to share, of course, this video with you. But thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right.
Cheers. Good night.
Say good night to Luis. And
yeah,
that was amazing. So panelists, Kelly, I know you play in this space. Juliana, you had a lot of great questions. Professor Greene, thoughts?
We have a lot of questions from people just about, I keep seeing the same themes over and over again. And one is that, this is just Beanie Babies. Yes and no. Okay, so I think that it might help to kind of frame this in a couple different categories. There are collectibles. There are collectibles that collectible NFTs that you definitely could equate to Beanie Babies or other fads where they get traded, or trading cards, baseball cards, things like that. People hold them, collect them, trade them, the whole thing. There are gaming NFTs that can be used in various video games. Those NFTs also you may be able to stake them and earn currency while you're playing. So that's another type. Then there's art that's just art for art's sake. And those are amazing. And that's where there's been this kind of disruption in the art space, where you can see that the artist has the potential to earn that residual income, and that's a game changer for a lot of them. And it's changing a lot of lives in that particular way. And then there are all the other applications of the technology and NFTs that we are just scratching the surface of. And I think that's where people need to think bigger, because if you're only saying, this is Beanie Babies, I'll see you later, you're missing the bigger picture and the potential that's there in the technology itself. And what I can tell you is that you're starting to see more music NFTs. You're starting to see more book NFTs. You're starting to see more of membership cards NFTs that are letting you into different things like restaurants, golf courses, whatever. And then there's potential for things like UBI and life-changing aspects of this crypto space that can really change the world. I mean, to sound crazy, but true, where this can be very life-changing. You know, you can hear Luis talking about that in the Philippines. And I just listened to another artist talking about Argentina and the way in which they're doing something called proof of humanity and creating a UBI with their NFTs. So there's so many different aspects to it that I just, you know, suggest keeping your mind open, spend a lot of time absorbing and learning, and more will be revealed. So I just wanted to kind of say that because I know there's a little bit of confusion on what exactly are NFTs. So, and that smart contract that's in the background that's connected with the NFT is really the key to all of this. And it's also the key for attorneys to really think about the applications of that technology and how we can use it.
Another item I would like to flag from his story, which I think is super important for the legal community to be thinking about as we're actually practicing in this space. And I know that Nelson worries about this every day, is the fact that you're creating a digital asset, and I've sort of started to comment upon this in the comments, that is perpetual. So we have all these different legal regimes, copyright, patent, trademark in the United States and elsewhere, and they provide you certain legal rights under certain types of law, but the asset itself technically will continue to exist as long as the distributed ledger libraries are continuing to exist on any server anywhere. You can always go find that record. And so that, and the asset itself can be transferred, and it can have a life that is as long as human civilization continues, far after we all die and our grandchildren die, if we're so fortunate as a civilization to continue that long. And so as lawyers, this is extremely tricky when you have governance rights that you have to consider. How is this going to be used now? How is it going to affect the owner? How is it going to affect the company that created it for risk and liability for what this becomes? Just like digital assets, we think of them as very static and being bound to who created them or who owns them under the law. But now we're going to be thinking about them doing many things that are unintended. In his case, they created something, and the power of its evolution of what that NFT meant and what it was valued at changed dramatically from their first foray. Typical startup story is you fail, you close the company, you all go your separate ways. You have this intellectual property that you created, but no one's going to buy it, no one's going to care about it. In this case, you had these external factors that made the IP that still existed, still had a life, pull everyone back to this company because it had a second life. It had, and now these NFTs for the curios are going to just keep going on and on and on, and they're going to do many different things. They're going to become and mean different things as they change their role in transactions. Are they just going to be assets? Are they going to be considered fine art in the future? Are they going to be considered, who knows, you know, what they're going to be, collateral, you know? And so as a lawyer, I've seen this in a case study I'm happy to discuss as we keep going, which is the Constitution DAO situation. I'll save that after we get some more comments on our first speaker.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
I'm
that.
in Constitution DAO. I own some.
Uh-oh. I'm going to pull in Elizabeth and Ben and then circle back to Nelson, because I'm sure he's going to support a lot of your comments. But Elizabeth, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to, you know, we're talking a lot about NFTs as an image or a JPEG, and Kelly was starting to allude to other files, but this is not completely technically true, but I think it's really helpful for people to think of. Think of an NFT as a new file format, which is a file format that is tracked and on the blockchain. So that could be any file type. We're talking about JPEGs, but it could be a .wav file, music, a .mov file, a .json file if you wrote code, a .html file. So then when you start to think about a file that is tracked on the blockchain, what went into that file? Labor. Everything that you write, an article, a document for work, everything, a contract, everything took labor. So we're really kind of monetizing labor. And so that just sort of should open up your mind to where all this can go.
Yeah, Ben, that's actually great. The file, the media format is just a file, right? It doesn't matter what what the subject matter sort of underlying that file is.
I'd like to extend those points that Kelly, Juliana, and Elizabeth. We talk about they're digital assets that are created, and there are many forms, and certainly a file form might be a fair reference, but other forms of digital assets are created. While we reflect on the miraculous chaos ongoing that Luis had mentioned, and talk about that wave riding in and riding out in the context of art, we're looking way, way beyond art. And what is most exciting to me is commerce and society in the 21st century. We spend most of our time in traditional environments from business and frankly in law, fixing the 20th century. And this is an opening that unleashes opportunities to think about innovative practices for the 21st century and new elements on it as well. When we were focusing around atoms and exchange of atoms and protection of atoms, that's our laws have been often focused, our privacy laws, and that are derived from protection of atoms. We move into that digital world, a lot of things open up, and it opens up in the creativity. It was interesting to hear Luis's what it stimulated in terms of creative energy, the success of what he did against the familiar or modifying the familiar, accelerated into new venues of innovation and creativity. And besides that, it also moves it closer. It inverts the markets to the artist closer. It's more artist-centered. So some of these aspects that are sort of macro changes are going to persist in the 21st century.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, we've got a lot of activity happening from the audience. So Nelson, I think you were next in my queue, and then Professor Greene, and then Dr. Morris. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Nicole. And I wish Luis was still on the webinar at the moment, although he needs some rest. I can't say too much, but the kind of innovative part that he is interested in with respect to programmatic NFTs, there are people that are doing that. So as I said, I personally can't say too much about it, but it's coming down the pipe, which is very exciting, right? Because that changes things dramatically and really bridges the kind of offline world and the online world in a way that we haven't exactly experienced just yet. But I think Juliana raised a ton of really good points, as well as everyone else, with respect to thinking about risk for brands and consumers, given that all of this is perpetual. And I don't have much to add to that outside of the fact that one of the, at least with respect to public permissionless blockchains, one of the risks that's somewhat existential that kind of gets to NFTs is what happens if any of these chains fork. For those that don't know, a blockchain, a percentage of the users of the network could decide, hey, we don't like the way the network is going because of upcoming rule changes, et cetera, and they can start abiding by a different set of rules as another set of users. And all of a sudden you have a split, and basically you have a split in transaction history. Where this may be problematic for NFTs, or where it will be problematic, is if an NFT that was created pre-split, that will continue to exist in the transaction history on each chain down the road. So you could have a situation, and I can't even believe I'm saying this because I hated this part of law school in the bar exam, where you have a bona fide purchaser, however you want to say it correctly, down the road who thinks they've purchased the legitimate copy of an NFT, but it exists on two different chains, right? And this is something that nobody has really had to worry about yet because everybody's still in the excitement phase and people are making lots of money, but it's going to happen at some point. And just the last point I'll add is that I have worked with a couple of large brands that were considering NFT launches, and they are really very concerned about those perpetual risks, right? Because they have brands, that they anticipate to be around or like to be around for hundreds of years. Smaller creators, startup platforms, people that are building NFT tools, that's a totally different risk profile, right? So it's like they understand that conceptually, but they don't care, right? They're trying to build a business. So that's all I have.
While we're on this risk, we do have a question from Noah in the audience about this whole notion of people who've had their Bored Apes, I guess he pulled it, hacked on OpenSea.
I just answered it, sorry.
Yeah, no, good, because it was related. So
I had just hit the answer.
Perfect.
Okay, so the Bored Ape, they had them stolen from OpenSea, but it was because the person who listed it made the error. They chose not to delist it, instead just moving it to a hardware wallet offsite. So when they put it connected that hardware wallet again, it relisted it. So if they had delisted it in the proper way, which would have cost us a little bit of a fee, it wouldn't have been stolen. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, from a legal perspective, yes, OpenSea might get sued. However, I think they're going to have a really good defense.
I was thinking OpenSea probably has a bunch of, as soon as you sign and create your OpenSea account, all these things that say you will not, you assume
terms and
the risk.
Conditions. Yep. Terms and conditions. I'm sure it's in there and I'm sure they're covered. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to Professor Greene, Dr. Morris.
Thank you, Professor Morris. There are actually two Professor Morrises. Professor Nicole Morris. Wow, what a great discussion. And I thought what you were saying was very, very profound. So as lawyers or people in the legal industry, we're naturally rather risk averse. And we've been known to spoil a party or two, right? Because of that in all kinds of contexts. When I was invited to speak at Duke Law School on Public Domain Day in 2020, when a lot of works came into the public domain, I wrote a poem about the public domain, which I presented, and it showed that the public domain is a wonderful concept. However, as applied to African-American artists, has not been. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to be involved in this conference, and I'm glad that Nicole invited me, is that on the one hand, and I was interviewed by Bloomberg about NFTs and how African-American artists particularly, and music artists are flocking to the NFT space. And there's a simple reason why they are, because we have a music industry complex that basically operates on a gangster basis and extracts wealth from African-Americans. And I've been writing about this for 20 years, over 20 years, right, on this. So I want this to be the great party that it could be. But on the other hand, I look at other promises that were made of technologies that would empower African-American artists and didn't pan out. I look at the fact that there's still a massive digital divide between the resources of African-Americans and other groups of society. And I wonder, one, will a lot of people miss the boat? And two, do they want to be on the boat? Because are the protections in place for their works not to be expropriated? The history of African-Americans in music is of expropriation, of them losing their works, of being appropriated. Now, this is supposed to be a secure blockchain, so that would take out some of that risk, but I'm not necessarily persuaded. That's why I asked Lewis, did you retain the rights to your work? Other issues that I think in this space, as artists are creating NFTs, say in music, are they registering their copyrights? Do they realize that if they don't have a copyright registration, they can't enforce their rights, period? They can do a DMAC takedown, but if they do the takedown and they don't have a registration certificate, that's it. It's the end of the story. The thing's going to go back up. So I just look at this and I see tons of issues. And I don't say this to be negative or to be a naysayer, but before we invite particularly marginalized communities into the space, we better be damn sure that we're not going to replicate what this happened since 1920 in the beginning of the recording industry, which was launched by two African-American women, Bessie Smith and Mamie Smith, neither of which ended up with anything at the end of the day. I have now concluded my opening statement.
I'm not letting you get off that easy. No, that's right. That's right. It's like you dropped the mic and there was no mic. Like, you're the first person to
Dr.
drop the
Greene
mic
is
on
available. Dr. Greene is available for all the attendees to hire as a consultant as they're building out these startups and writing their governance documents and considering this, right? And lobbying Congress. So I'm going to definitely call Dr. Greene whenever we have a government outreach campaign we're thinking about related to this stuff. So thank you, Professor Morris, for inviting all of these panelists so that we could hear.
No, Professor Greene is the truth on all things copyright for me. I go nowhere without asking him a question in email. But you know what? You're exactly right. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to convene you all together, because I think a lot of folks are getting into this space, particularly people who are new to tech, but they see this as a huge payday, that we have to still remember the underlying sort of doctrinal law, particularly copyright law in this instance, that if you don't file and register your copyright for some of this work, you're not really fully protecting yourself. And I actually echo your concerns in terms of marginalized communities that will be taken advantage of, right? So everyone should retain their rights. If we've got folks in the audience who are looking at getting into this NFT artist space, I loved how Luis broke it down between collectors and artists. It's perfect. I'm not creating anything. I'm going to be on the collector side. But as the creators, you all really need to consult with someone about getting your copyright protected before you tinker around too far and head down a path of no return. All right, Dr. Morris, you had your hand up. You're so patient. Thank you, my dear.
Oh, listen, I've been in here learning. Thank you for having me. I have so many things, but I'm going to just touch on a few, and I'm not going to go so deep. I'm just going to, keep it light. So I am by training a chemist, right? So I have worked as a polymer chemist in undergraduate, biomolecular chemist as a graduate student. I have worked with different materials. I've worked in sustainability. I have worked, you name it, I've almost done it in chemistry. So when I think about the sustainability piece, that hasn't really hit the scientific world. There is not really a green process for mining. In lots of countries now, as we're in this COVID crisis, energy crises, especially since it's been happening, a lot of minting has happened in European countries, small European countries. They have started to shut it down. So then how does that really threaten the integrity of the blockchain? So if you are building over the blockchain and now they are shutting down because energy usage is too high, then how then does that affect what you've already built or used that they have? I mean, they really don't have any control over when their country says, you can no longer mine. So maybe it's just the mining portion of it, but we talk about wanting to, not have so many hands on regulating this process, but at the same time, we still need some types of regulation in place. And so it's kind of like an oxymoron of ideas in terms of what is needed. I've always said that chemists need to kind of jump on this in terms of new materials. So like what type of new materials can we be using, new chips, different, right now they use a certain type of silicone wafer in these headsets, but the way that it's going to be more affordable, more accessible, be able to hold more information is if there's a new material. And so like anybody out there doing material science, nanotechnology type of work, this is an opportunity to kind of find your niche in that space. When I think about NFTs, having worked or having graduated from a historically Black college university, Clark Atlanta University as an undergrad, moving on to Emory for graduate school, but now being back at an HBCU, Morehouse College, all Black, all male, alma mater of Martin Luther King Jr., I think about lack of exposure for our students. So students haven't really jumped into NFTs. Some of them have, some of them haven't. But a lot of that, when I thought about like, why is it that the Black community hasn't really like jumped into this space like I thought that they would? And if you think about how NFTs work a lot like how the art world works. Like it's holding on to art and, finding the value in it and letting it appreciate and then reselling it. It's kind of like having that type of asset. There's no Mona Lisas around here. I'm just to be clear, like there's not, they take art appreciation or the history of art, but they don't really understand how it applies to their everyday life because that's not a part of the world that we really live in, right? So an NFT to them also is similar. It's like still trying to learn a process, whereas other people have kind of the jump because they understand how art appreciates and how it's passed down. And so they've been in this world. That hasn't been the case for many especially all like 60% of our students are first generation, college educated students. That is not the normal. Generational wealth being passed down through art pieces is not what they know. And so the exposure to how art appreciates, and then that would help give them the advantage and exposure of an appreciation of NFTs. And I don't know if that appreciation will come when it's already too late, Like,
yeah, no, that's a great point. And I know we're past our breaking time. We've got lots of really good questions going on in the Q&A. And I think what I'm going to do is allow folks to take a break because we've got more stuff to discuss and get back. And then we'll try to get some of those Q&A questions responded to either verbally or live when we return. And I don't want my admin person giving me stares of death, laser eyes. She already said, what time are we stopping? So here's the thing, we're gonna take exactly 10-minute break. I wish this were like some better produced kind of event. I can play music for you or something like that. We don't have any of that. I'm just gonna put my
You can just stream
on.
some YouTube. Just share your screen with a YouTube like spa channel.
Oh.
I have Nicole, I have music from the artist. I'm not gonna play it. What's the name of this artist? 3LAU, 3 Lau. Do you know about him?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Wow.
I'm an old fuddy duddy. Nelson knows about him, so clearly I'm gonna be researching that after this conference.
Yeah.
All right, so
He's got a music service now based on NFTs. It's pretty interesting, but I'm not gonna play it. Later on, if you want to hear a song, we can hear it.
Okay.
And Dr. Morris, I just wanted to know, your audio is very low. I can barely hear you when you're speaking.
Oh, wow. Okay. What about now?
You know, but much better.
Much better. I had my
Mo better.
I had my notebook covering the mic. I've been taking notes.
I'll see you in a minute. Okay, thanks.
We'll be back. All right, it is 12:30. That was a great first session. I'm mad we had that huge, awful time difference because I would have wanted Luis to stay for the entire event, but I didn't want to overstay my welcome with him. That was amazing. We will get to some of the questions in the Q&A. I'm going to try to have Professor Greene, particularly focused on the one with Black artists and creators, weigh in because he's really the scholar on point for that. I know we did not talk about sort of the lack of environmental sustainability right now with NFTs. It's not unique per se to NFTs. It's really Bitcoin, right? It's blockchain and the energy to do that work. As an innovation conference, I don't want it to go without saying that is definitely a legitimate critique of this technology, and hopefully we'll have some innovators working on solving that problem because I think
yeah, to speak to that, Nicole, they already are.
Good.
They're already, and I think that's the difference in this space with, if you look at the auto industry, what did it take them? Decades, maybe 100 years before even thinking about energy. You've got, this is, 23rd, we've got about 13 years of Bitcoin and only about, 4 or 5 years of Ethereum really being used heavily. And they're already making those changes and adjustments. So you will see a shift with the energy usage as Ethereum moves to proof of stake, which means that it just takes less energy to make the computations to make those imprints on the blockchain. So, and that's coming this year. It's in progress right now. And then there's around Bitcoin, there's a lot being done on the hardware side. Intel just announced last week that they have a new chip that they're working on that's going to be less energy for Bitcoin for mining. So there's a lot happening around that. Okay. And also Nicole, the use of energy, like El Salvador using the volcano to power Bitcoin mining is a great example of like trying to really be creative and out of the box.
Yeah, I just flagged that issue with Nicole just because it was, it came up in the literature, and you guys are much more expert on that than I am. And then the other piece
came up in the literature, and it came up in the chat today too.
Yeah,
and it's a
lot of questions on that.
A legitimate critique.
The other piece, of course, is the contract piece. So when Lewis was talking, I want to see the contract. I want to see the contract that he entered in with these guys, because right now I've not seen that aspect really highlighted. Without those contracts, it's like these catalog sales that these guys are doing. And I was on a panel, Primary Wave, with the president of Primary Wave. He's talking about how great this is for artists. And I'm like, okay, great. Show me the contract. Don't sit there and tell me what's in the contract, right? So I think that also is a critical piece of this, is how the contract and the intellectual property rights are going to flow. And that doesn't seem at all clear to me right now.
I think you're exactly right. When it's a founder working with a separate artist and they're not the same, or they're not, connected, they're hiring essentially an artist, then yes, 100%. I think a lot of that's getting missed in the kind of Wild West feel of this. But when you have I think the exciting part of this is that the artists can take over themselves. You know what I mean? They can do a lot of this themselves, and that's a new approach. And we've seen it kind of develop through social media, and now it's just kind of taking that to the next level, where you, in terms of being able to fund your own project and things like that.
We need to make sure that we are not conflating the issue of the process of the platform and the nature of a contract embedded with the artifact, because most of what we've seen has been the process of the platform agreement, like the 10% royalty, and we have not seen the scripted structure into the artifact and along with the artifact as well. And that has to be a key part of things going forward.
Good point, Ben. I would love either Juliana or Nelson, in terms of the contract terms themselves, if you guys have some thoughts on that, because I think that's a great point. We have not seen that. That's not as transparent.
I'm happy to briefly take that. So The reality is that to kind of get to a point where both parties have a greater degree of certainty as to what their legal rights are, what they're acquiring, what they're selling, you have to do boring vanilla legal work, right? Terms and conditions came up earlier. I do a fair amount of terms and conditions work at the moment related to NFT platforms and projects because there aren't really good on-chain solutions for these problems. And when I say on-chain solutions, you're actually fairly limited in what sort of data you can store in a blockchain. Doesn't matter if it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, or whatever else. And so, and this comes up all the time. It actually just came up earlier today with a friend who we've been talking about this for a couple of years. Has anybody done IP assignments on chain? And I was like, this again? Because we can't do it, right? You can try and introduce evidence of intent of that assignment, right? Because you can store hashes in there. For people who don't know, a hash is basically a fingerprint of a document. You run data for a document or a computer or whatever else through a mathematical equation, and you get a unique fingerprint for that information, right? You can store that in a transaction. So theoretically, you can say, well, this is intent, because now we've stored this document elsewhere, and when you run it through that equation, you get that fingerprint. So clearly, this is what the parties meant when they got in this transaction. So, but honestly, that's kind of as far advanced as it's gone with respect to on-chain data. Now, there are off-chain solutions that people are working on, very creative, but like, again, and not to hammer this, but in a frothy market where everybody's excited and it's new and people are making money, it's like when you, they don't necessarily want to pay me. Maybe they're happy to pay Juliana. They're not happy to pay me the tens of thousands of dollars to really like deep dive into this, right? Of how are we going to do this? And they don't want to build out all that architecture when there's just kind of a more low hanging fruit. So that's what I have to add there.
Right. So that sounds like there's a real clash between what the Copyright Office requires, for example, for assignments, and the interface between the NFT, the ownership. There's a big clash there. This guy who was the artist who sold his album online, he made like $11 million. This 3 Lao guy. What was remarkable was, so he's supposed to be, when you purchase this NFT, you're also supposed to get a royalty stream that comes with it. But it said in the Rolling Stone article that he's actually doing those payouts manually. So that kind of speaks to what you're saying, right? And it's like, doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of what this is supposed to do? If he's paying it out in an old school way rather than, through the chain. So I think those are great points, Nelson. I think this is going to keep a lot of lawyers busy. That's what I see for a long time.
I'm particularly pumped to comment on this because my background was initially as a software developer and then product manager, and then I switched over to law as a second career. And so I look at the issue that Nelson, we're seeing the same thing. We're dealing with consulting with a land records office that wants to put their land records system on this technology, and we have the same issue as far as like the limited amount of data that we can put on chain. And so as a engineer, mindset in my background and talking to all of the developers who are aggressively trying to solve these problems in this brave new world, we look at that as a technical challenge. And the engineering mindset is if it's a technical challenge, there's a solution. It's just a matter of time. It's of creativity. And so one of the solutions that I can share that's in an open source project that's not widely publicized, but is out in the world is initially just trying to fractionalize the data that needs to be stored to the point where it's almost like going back to BitTorrent style, where there's a lot more hashes for each bit, but then you can just spread that record across many more hashes in order to solve that problem. The problem is we have the intersection of the technology solution meets the energy and the processing costs and the gas fees cost of like any kind of transaction. Now you have to pull from all of these different blocks, right? Whenever you're going to go back and mine. So there's still work to be done, but that's for a transaction that just needs slightly more space on the chain than we currently can accomplish. And it's a high value transaction, so that's worth the cost. We have to solve this problem on a technical level, but there are creative solutions already coming for it. And I agree with Nelson's implicit statement, although he didn't explicitly state it. And tell me if you want to edit this, Nelson. But if it's not on the chain and it's off chain, it isn't the perpetual safe record. It doesn't have the clout of saying this is a secure, authenticated part of the deal. Because if it's off chain, any part of that deal or that transaction that is critical to title or rights or duties is off chain, suddenly it can be modified without that proof of that ledger backing it up. So it is really important that we solve this technical challenge. So all the developers and CTOs, product managers who are on this, we all want this to happen on the lawyer side. And as a person who sits in both camps, I'm happy to brainstorm with you pro bono about this, because I think it's really important for the future of this, as well as the developer tools continuing to be worked on. And then of course, finding more technology blockchain backends that can be more energy efficient and develop in the mining. So that's a huge problem too.
Yeah, if I may just add briefly, yeah, I didn't explicitly say that, but that gets to kind of what, so I have a degree in computer science. I didn't work as a developer. I went to law school afterwards, but what is interesting about this technology field to me is the censorship resistant aspect to it that it's afforded, really characteristic because it exists on a spectrum. And that sort of artificial, that digital scarcity created amongst a group of participants that are hostile to each other, right? I think the most fascinating projects in this space are public, permissionless, decentralized, whatever you want to say that means, projects, because those are technologically new, right? They didn't exist before Bitcoin. And so Juliana's exactly right. Once you go, so like Bitcoin and Ethereum would be layer one. And once you go to another layer of abstraction up, it could be another technological network, whatever, then you're at layer two. And layer two is and none of this is legal advice, but layer two is where people can get subpoenaed, right? And if people can get subpoenaed, information can be taken down, right? And so there is kind of an inherent ideological, philosophical, whatever you want to say, conflict between the capabilities of the technology and what sort of new human behaviors it enables, and our existing systems, right? And perhaps there's ways they will never be able to be married. We don't know. It's an open question. And actually, on this one last point, Juliana, on the storage point, I don't know if you remember the SIA project, which has horribly rebranded to Skynet. They're a great team, but I mean, really, why would you call during these times, why would you call any technology project Skynet? But I digress. Obviously, I'm a Terminator fan, but they have taken an approach very similar to what you said. Well, okay, if we want to store 100 gigabytes of data on chain, well, what if we just basically use a bunch of references and store a little bit here, a little bit there, and let's just basically create like a daisy chain, right? So there are definitely, I mean, the next 5-10 years could be very, very fascinating with respect to all of this.
I don't want to belittle this and keep us here forever, but I do have questions about that layer two part, mainly because I'm not a computer science algorithm person, but I'm curious how layer two gets us to the subpoenas suddenly, but we'll come back. We'll circle back within the last 30 minutes of that, because that's fascinating. All right. Metaverse, folks ready to join us in the metaverse? I don't even know where to start. What is the metaverse? Let's start there, because I'm just like, let's get into Shayne's
No. That's actually a great place to start. First and foremost, let me say this is a phenomenal panel, and it is great to be on here with such experts, particularly within the NFT field. I've dabbled in it, but I am learning a lot here on this panel. Metaverse is obviously where I live and where I spend most of my time, and kind of where I'm dealing with legal issues. So, kind of a fundamental question. What is the metaverse? And I get this question a lot. Really, if you think of it, it's really just a fully immersive environment that's really connecting both the augmented and virtual reality. So ultimately, it's an environment where you have mixed reality. And if you think of it, kind of for the building blocks on the virtual part, it's, you may, for those that have watched Ready Player One, that you know, Nicole mentioned earlier, you get some aspect of the virtual part, even Minecraft or Roblox, more modern day metaverse environments that you're seeing that are fully virtual are like Decentraland and the Sandbox. But then you've got this interesting piece where you're bringing in the augmented reality as well. And, you know, you might see some of that with our Oculus headset. And you've got the hand tracking feature, which is a really neat feature that you could use completely untethered. And you start moving your hands and the sensors on your Oculus are tracking your hands. So it's it's a closer connection to the physical with the virtual. Another feature that we have, that the app that we put out is our Horizons workrooms. I would definitely tell you to like check it out if you can, which is basically a virtual office environment. I have one-on-ones with my manager in that environment. Ben, I see you've got your Oculus headset. I'll give you a shout out for that. Oh, Dr. Morris too. But it's a virtual environment where it's neat in that it uses you could use that hand tracking feature. You have a virtual whiteboard. You could communicate, you know, right on the virtual whiteboard and essentially feel like you're present there with the other person, even though you're using avatars. The interesting, you know, kind of connection and where you'll see even more that augmented reality is that you could take your physical laptop, you know, or take a keyboard and connect it and still interact with your physical laptop and kind of see your physical laptop and everything on it while you're still in that virtual environment. I will give a shout out to Dr. Muhsinah Morris. Please follow her on LinkedIn. She's got a lot of really cool posts that begin to kind of show you where that connection with the Oculus headset starts to become closer to the physical. You know, I think the important part of metaverse in one area that I'm definitely thinking about a lot is interoperability, right? We want someone to be able to build an avatar within our environment, within our Oculus environment, but also be able to port that over to different metaverses. You know, that might be developed by other companies that some may consider friends or competitors, but, you know, we still want them to be able to port those avatars on and still be in a position where they could continue to have that same digital experience. You know, I think from a meta perspective, you know, it's important that we have the technology that's really going to kind of allow that the mixed reality to become really kind of more present and it just make it feel like it's even more possible. So, you know, we'll be coming out with some future devices that have, you know, more sensors on them, which obviously allows the hand tracking feature to work even better, higher resolution. You know, the more sensors allow for a kind of more mixed reality pass through. So you have kind of that closer connection to the presence, to the physical environment. And then also, like, I think it's always good to have some healthy competition. I know what we're doing, but obviously I think many of you have probably heard that both Apple and Google are looking at mixed reality headsets as well. So, you know, there should be a lot going on within the space within the next year or two. You know, I think the one issue that's still common, and I think it's going to be an issue that we all have to deal with is how to actually get the form factor, right? How do you actually kind of get the device down to a size where you're completely comfortable wearing it like all day? I love my Oculus headset, but I have not done the 24-hour experiment, but it might be a tough one, right? Kind of considering the form factor right now. So it's getting that technology and still having that form factor where you can wear it. You know, again, I think for me, IP issues I definitely think about is, you know, the avatars and kind of the portability of those avatars and ensuring that if we're, you know, forming those partnerships or if we're making those avatars kind of transportable to different platforms, we have the right agreements in place to protect that IP. I definitely think about real estate within the metaverse, which I think is an area that, you know, I think even real estate companies are looking at now, and that ownership interest within the metaverse in, how do you, if you actually own some virtual real estate, how do you prevent someone else from taking that same virtual real estate that you have? And what do the disputes look like? I think during our prep call, I think Nelson mentioned there was a personal injury lawyer, right, in the metaverse. So I wonder just kind of what the legal issues are going to look like in the future. And it's definitely something that we're thinking about. Spent a lot of time talking about NFTs, but digital art, NFTs are definitely more than artwork, but digital artwork within the metaverse. And what does the ownership interest look like? When I have my virtual workroom or my virtual space that I've created, and I have my digital artwork, what happens if I've taken a digital, an NFT that someone else owns, and I do a nice copy, cut and paste, and I put it within my virtual environment, or I kind of take that artwork in some way, shape, or form. So a lot of interesting stuff going on within the metaverse. And I'd encourage you, and I obviously have to make the plug for our Oculus devices. I think it's a really good glimpse into kind of where things are right now, and really kind of where we could really see things going in the future.
I really wish I had done an Oprah type, do we all get an Oculus if we sign up for this conference kind of thing before we had today. But like, so Shayne, tell us. So the whole notion of property in AR and VR just gave me like a rule against perpetuities kind of nightmarish thought in terms of my property law students and lawyers out there. This whole, how could we, how this can go on? Am I going to give my heirs my virtual property asset or not? Because I don't think we have the in real life property issues nailed down enough to then add the virtual ones on top of it. So many questions. All right, so let's stay on the positive side. Dr. Morris, somehow you have incorporated teaching in the metaverse. Like that to me is just wild. I think I have vertigo, even though I don't think I've been diagnosed with vertigo. So I'm pretty sure if I tried to teach in the metaverse, I'd fall down. So tell us about teaching and what you're doing at Morehouse.
Hi, so yes, I'm gonna tell you a really funny story. So everyone has a story about getting what we call your sea legs or building your VR stamina. And I have 5 sons, and I have a husband who works in tech and is a gamer as a hobby. So builds on computers, like games out of control. That's his thing. Okay. So I tried the PlayStation VR when it came out. And so I was all ready and understood VR. Then I taught in an asynchronous Pico with my high school upward bound students. And then we had the opportunity to work again with Victory XR and do synchronous like instruction in this. So we're doing this demo, and I decided I was going to stand up. Don't do that. I decided I was going to stand up because, of course, if I'm going to be demoing a space in virtual reality, I don't want to be seated. And I had been seated in previous demos. And so I made my boundary in my living room, told them to keep my little toddler out the way so I'm running to him. And then was ready. We're in space. We're looking at this dissected pig. And my tour guide, a guy named Danny that works for Victory XR, is like, oh, you have to walk down the diaphragm. You have to like lean under. He was like, and your body will move and your avatar will move. And listen, I did that number and I couldn't get off of out of the headset fast enough. For whatever reason, I got so incredibly dizzy and I was so embarrassed. I couldn't even tell Danny, I gotta go. So I was like, Danny, well, let's just get back to the yard or whatever. So I finally get out of the headset and take it off and then run. Y'all, seriously, I hate to say it, I know it's gross. I puke my guts out, okay? And honestly, when I told my kids, I was like, Mommy's not doing well. I just had a demo. I didn't do very well. Do you know what my kids said to me? My children said, Mom, we thought you were about that life. You're not a real gamer. I was like, wow. So the thing about being in VR that I learned is that you really do have to build your stamina. You're in a totally immersive environment, and our kids play these games built in these 3D worlds all the time. So even when I played a game called Arc with them, like just everyone is in the same world, right? And they're using just the controller with like the Xbox. It is really like you're in this world. So then now fast forward to you actually being immersed in a totally simulated world. It can be like riding a roller coaster. So you really have to build your VR stamina. And I found a good way to do that. So I never got sick again because I didn't try to like move myself fast. I learned how to move in 45-degree, like motion, and I do stationary unless I'm doing like some kind of dance game or something like that. And now I'm so used to it, I really can be in a headset for very long periods of time. I've been doing it for about 2+ years now. And so I don't get sick anymore, but I do a very rigorous upfront training with my students and the faculty that just get into VR. So we take baby steps. The closer you are to the ground, the better off you are in sense of like stability. So don't do this. I chose to make this decision as a parent. I have a toddler. I just wanted to see. It's not recommended for children under the age of 13, but my son, who is 4 and runs the household, said, "Mommy, give me those goggles. Let me see." Right? Okay, fine. Let me let you see what I'm seeing so you can leave me alone, actually. So I created the solar system for him in space and let him sit with his goggles that he calls it. And he literally was fine. I mean, he was walking around, there's Jupiter, and oh, wow, there's Venus. And like, this child stayed in him like what I consider to be way too long, but he was completely fine, not dizzy, nothing. My teens or my young adults, my students, the older they are or the taller they are and they decide to do it, then I've had them say, "Hold on, doc, I need like a break," after like 30 minutes, 45 minutes. But we don't stay in class longer than an hour. That's been our rule of thumb. So I've had that, but then as we get further into the lessons and we start doing more VR work, students are like, I'm like, y'all, it's time for me to go. And they just want to play. Now they're so excited and they love it. And the engagement, they stay engaged. So my students have become my teachers in this space. And I love that because what I did the first time, so we began teaching making virtual reality the classroom. That was the concept. The concept was not to enhance the classroom using virtual reality. It was to get rid of this whole Zoom situation. People had been zoomed out, fatigued, teamed out, tired of this 2D like platform. Doing breakout sessions and group work was just tedious and hard. Being a one facilitator in a classroom, you couldn't do that. Well, on the Engage platform, that's what we use. It's an app on the Oculus. It allows for the educator to be in this synchronous environment with their students. I like it because it has a lot of built-in classroom management things that allows you to mute students, use 3D voice. Students can be in groups and walk around. You can walk around and talk to them just as if we're in class together. And then most of all, you can give assessments there. They can't cheat. They can't look at notes that aren't already available to them, because if they take their headset off, it's going to tell me that they're away. If they talk, I'm going to hear them. If they, they can open their tablet with their own assessment questions and no one else can see it. They'll see that perhaps they're working on something, but it's invisible and it's only visible to them. If I send them out on some excursion in the space, I can all summon them back to me. That's something you can't even do in the real classroom. I don't have to go like, hey, y'all come back. They literally, I press a button and it's like, you will be teleported, and like, they're right back here. I love that part. I actually make students do that just so I can do that part. And summon them back to me, because as a parent of 5 boys, I wish I had that when we were on the street. So it's been really, really interesting. We started off in biology, men's health. Dr. Ethel Vereen teaches that. History 112, Dr. Ovell Hamilton is that instructor. And then in my advanced in organic chemistry, I did it as the lab portion. So I did it for the lab in chemistry, advanced inorganic chemistry, because there's a lot of visual spatial intelligence that can be built for students. Students cannot see molecules. They are like, they draw a complete blank when you start talking about symmetry and coordination chemistry and all these different things. And so for me, it was like, if I can help them visualize molecules, understand how orbitals look at what the reactions are, see what the steric hindrance is, like if they could really build these. And I know we could do it with molecular models, but you can't blow it up to as big as you want. You can't be in space doing it, right? In an astronaut suit. You can't walk on Mars and mine for minerals and things like that and talk about metals and different types of perhaps new substances that you can find. So you can't do a whole lot of that, right? But you can definitely do it in virtual reality. So I was able to take them to spaces they would never possibly inhabit, right? We're not going to Mars and climbing mountains and mining for things and then putting different objects out, but they could do that then. And so it brought me to a space of, if this can happen, almost anything can happen, and I can teach these students more. So I fast forwarded that to doing things cross discipline. So we had an English professor, Dr. Tanya Clark, who came in and we did a common lesson for biology and English, as well as chemistry and English, about Henrietta Lacks. So advanced inorganic chemistry is all about metals. This is really pulling out the metal part. And so we started talking about metals in medicine and how they use radium to treat Henrietta Lacks. It killed her healthy, and her, you know, the cancer cells could also kill the healthy cells. And that was the technology in 1950. And then like the evolution of the drugs using her HeLa cells to actually come up with a curative. And now we have all of these metal-based medicines that are now being used in chemo, from gold and platinum, that are working in a curative, and people are living. And they use the HeLa cells to do it. But then we have to infuse Black life history and culture in a lot of our lessons as a part of our QEP. So we were able to talk about health disparities. And Dr. Tanya Clark is an Afrofuturist, so really talking about how she was seen as a superhero throughout history and not really humanized. And like a lot of times Black people are dehumanized when they do heroic things, or, you know, and that is something that we need to start to address. So it brought a lot of things in context, but it was a wonderful experience for our students. The thing that I liked about it was that our students said that doing work in VR, and VR being in the classroom, made them want to explore the subject matter more. So we had students that were, I had specifically chemistry majors, upper level chemistry majors. Dr. Greene and Dr. Hamilton, they had students that weren't majors. They were just students who had to take that for a requirement, whether it was a first year experience or for our general ed curriculum. And these students were like, I want to be on a battleship. You know, I want to go back in time. Dr. Tanya Clark just taught Blacks in Wonderland, where she does this Afrofuturism part. And they went and visited La Amistad, the slave ship. And that experience is really powerful. So if you ever want a tour, just hit me up, because that will change you. And it started becoming not only us building these culturally responsive spaces or culturally appropriate spaces, but these emotive experiences for our students. If they could walk a mile in someone else's shoes, then it definitely can build empathy, and it puts humanity back into the classroom. And then giving them space to be creators. So I flipped the classroom with my analytical chemistry course in fall and had them develop and learn everything that I had to learn in terms of creating these spaces, and have them do it. And then we've written grants now, and Morehouse in the Metaverse is really just soaring. Like it's turned into its own thing. And so we're doing more looking at just different areas of the metaverse. One of the projects that is a heart project for me, because even though this technology should not exist in a dystopian society, we cannot overlook the fact that we are in a pandemic. And the way that this technology has grown is because we are in a pandemic, and the necessity for development and the ability and the capability for people in this industry to develop more, and for a need to be there. We can't deny that, right? So it's kind of a dystopian society, even though I think that being in this metaverse space will allow us to build a better world in real life, because we'll be able to imagine different possibilities, and then we'll be able to work with people, and it's geographically agnostic. So it doesn't matter if you're in Mexico, it doesn't matter if you're in Venezuela, it doesn't matter if you're in Hawaii. We can all be in the same room. It doesn't matter if we speak a different language. They have captions and things that can allow us to communicate and talk, but then also see one another. So that is really powerful when you put people in that one space. My heart project this semester is our Morehouse in the Metaverse Mindset Mondays, or Meditation Mondays, that we're going to start doing. Students, especially Black males, have had to put their mental health, like be strong, toughen up, it's okay, you'll live through it. And our students have been on campus and off campus, tested, locked in their rooms when they're on campus. There's an outbreak, quarantine here, and all universities have done that. So I challenge everyone. But what we're going to do is the students who've had a headset and students who want to participate in this project will do mindset or meditation Mondays at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. And students, faculty, and staff are welcome to come. I love the Engage platform because you don't necessarily have to be in immersive technology or have a headset to do it, even though we do have headsets. Thank you, Meta. We do have lots of headsets that are circulating on our campus. We have about 450. So definitely Meta, and then Qualcomm was a funder, Southern Company. Let me just go ahead and shout them out. Unity Technologies. Thank you, because without you, this could not be possible. And we definitely needed the ability to expose our students to this technology. But we're going to be doing that Meditation Mondays and just trying to see if providing some type of support in the space of mental health for our students will allow them to thrive, in the midst of so many transitions, especially as they're becoming young men. And I think that's really, really important. So also exposing them to things like NFTs and fintech and the blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. And all of that is necessary. And so they use it for gaming, but they haven't quite put in their mind that it is a sector that they can also go in. And so now with sectors all across divisions, disciplines, no matter where you are, they're using this type of technology, whether it is AR or VR or MR or something, XR technologies are being used. It's necessary that educators get on this bandwagon. And so my job as the VR pioneer is to make sure that every educator globally has access to good professional development from someone who cried night and day in a headset and fell asleep at her desk and, puked their guts out when it was new. So you don't have to do all that. I can lead you to where you need to go because we've laid the framework to transform the landscape of education, and getting it to our youth is really, really important. So we can start doing all the research on the higher ed level, but we really want to get it to our K-12, our educators there, because the younger they are, just like when we started using, we went from like poster boards to trifold boards to PowerPoints and doing like science fair or presentations in school. Now students are going to have to use some type of XR technology to present their work, and they need to, because they're going to be the ones that exist in these augmented worlds, these immersive worlds, and they need to be competent in using the technology. So that is the goal, and that is the hope, and that is what I'm planning on doing. We're doing it actually. We've taught across disciplines in maybe like 8 courses now, doing research, and we'll be releasing more data, but it has been such an engaging, wonderful experience. I will put my LinkedIn information in the chat, and you can reach out.
I feel like you just gave us a sermon. We just had Sunday morning on Thursday at 1 o'clock.
Listen, I tell them all the time, if you're not moving,
Let the church say.
Okay, so you gotta move the young people, because they're 100% of our future, and we got to make sure that they're prepared. And I know this is one way that I could do that. So
you said 2 things that were tremendously helpful for all the academics on here, right? So the notion of assessments and students, being able to manage sort of the classroom or the assessment environment in terms of if you have, cheating or what I call collaboration. I use that phrase with like law faculty. It's like, they're not cheating, they're collaborating. It's unauthorized collaborations. We get it. But yeah, I had not thought about that. So that's particularly exciting in terms of it's a way to manage. I think there's going to be some level of Zoom school that will stay with us forever. right? So one of the challenges for all folks, whether it's high school or post-secondary, is how do you manage testing in this environment? We've all seen, at least on the legal side, the debacle of the bar exam, right? So you can kind of solve for some of those problems with, I think, using metaverse or some sort of VR and augmented reality for those situations. So that is super interesting. We've gotten a lot of comments. First of all, everyone wants to take your class, so kudos to you. But tell me now, because this is actually where I am stepping out of my personal comfort zone, but hearing your remarks on how you're using this technology in education, and Shayne, what you guys are looking at, how do you then add on Web 3.0, which in my humble understanding is the ability for people to create their own sort of controlled kind of like URLs or internet content. You know, there's 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And I can't find my notes to define all of those right now. But as you think about 3.0 and what you're seeing today, I'll start with Shayne, and then Dr. Morris, I'll have you comment, and then I'll open it up for, obviously we've got the skilled panel. So if anybody else wants to jump in.
Yeah, so this is, really the immersive mixed reality environment is kind of part of that iteration of Web 3.0 and kind of what's going to help us take us there. So if you are in a virtual environment and you want to watch TV in your virtual, I attended a basketball game using my Oculus headset, right? So you could be in a virtual environment and you could experience, almost kind of, you could have an experience that basically rivals the physical environment, and you just don't need as much access to some of the other technology. You could take calls within that virtual environment. So it's an environment that is, you're still present physically, you still feel present physically, but it's removing that reliance on certain aspects of kind of the physical life, where you have other options that are consistent with those within the virtual environment. So it's, I think, interoperability, and I pointed to it before. If you think of it, it's kind of that decentralization, right? I mean, it's still the platform. There still are going to be multiple kind of metaverses, multiple environments. But when you add that interoperability, it gets you to a place where it's not just kind of, you're not just limited to your avatar or your virtual presence, or quite frankly, your physical presence being limited to one platform. So it is kind of helping us get to that Web 3.0, where you are not just kind of solely reliant on the traditional kind of physical internet that we rely on right now. So that would be my kind of your response on kind of how I think this gets us closer to that Web 3.0. From where we are right now.
Dr. Morris, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I'm here with my hand.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll wait for you to
I took
unstable.
took my video down. But I think it's really important for us to start really thinking about creation and how do we create in this space. Interoperability is one of the things that, for me, if that was existing right now, I would be a showstopper. I promise you. But that part is still being built out, and like I really wished still that, and I've been throwing this out here, that if we could get people who do like simulations to develop 3D worlds where our students can get a better handle, especially chemistry students or anybody that works at the bench, biology in the STEM sciences that have to be at the bench, could have a better dexterity. So I know, because I have to now bring myself up because I'm talking with my hands, but we know that there are several haptic feedback gloves that are necessary. So for chemistry, and I'll speak specifically for chemistry because I know it, is you have to have a certain amount of bench hours. According to the American Chemical Society, you have to have a certain amount of hours at the bench. And that means that what you learn at the bench, and that's why our labs are 4 and 5 hours long, and that's why a lot of people opt out of chemistry, is you are able to use your fingertips, and you learn these fine motor skills that it takes to really be efficient and effective when you're working with chemicals. as much as I love my joysticks, right? I love my little joysticks here. That doesn't allow for that, right? But haptic feedback gloves would. And so I've tried several different ones, and I know Meta is working on more of it, but they're also working on hand tracking too, right? So making sure that you can actually track your hands well. And all of that would be good for chemists. So there's a lot in that space that can be developed. And I'm going ahead and throw the charge out to someone else. I've sat and I've created molecules myself for quite some time, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there, you know, to other educators. If you know people who really, really want to get into this space, that's where a big gaping hole is. And we love to have you aboard. But definitely think that developing student creators, our students are magnificent. They have the mindset to want to create. I mean, have you seen TikTok? I mean, these people are full-fledged producers, okay? Super producers, okay, without real titles. And so they know how to move and shake, and they do it so fearlessly. You know, we think about all of the even legal ramifications, and I'm not trying to say that they don't, but they just kind of buck the system and then create new rules. And part of that is what we all need, right? We need to just fearlessly, you know, go forward with our ideas. But, you know, we check and balance ourselves a lot. And something that they don't have is they don't have that. But a problem with working in, somebody in the chat just asked me about working in synthesis labs and saving money on glassware. The issue with working in a chemistry lab right now that we still have to work on is the feedback, like safety issues. So students are more apt, there's literature out there that says that students are more apt to make safety issues when emulating a concept that they did in an immersive environment when they go into a real lab. Yes, they know the procedure and they know the right things to do, but sometimes they will forget about safety things. So like when you're in the headset, you can reach for glassware that is on a Bunsen burner and not burn your hands. Or there has to be some type of programming. That's why I said these lab simulators need to come in and do some other things with the platforms so that when you reach for that glassware, either they're going to feel it through a vibration or some type of haptic feedback, or it's not going to allow them to touch it without putting on like a hot glove or something like that. So those are the things that need to be kind of fleshed out a little bit more. And we're getting there. I'm just glad that we can have this conversation because, like I said, the first time I put on a VR headset was with the PlayStation VR. And I was like, okay, so I am, you know, swimming with the sharks and like, what else? Like, what's the next step? Like, what else are we going to do in this thing? But I knew that it was going to grow. And then doing it in an asynchronous environment was great too, like using the Pico with my students, but I wasn't in there with them. So now that we can all be on platforms together and actually in one space and socialize, but really learn from one another, I mean, sky's the limit. I'm excited about what we can all create together.
So I know, Ben, you had some thoughts, and maybe Elizabeth, if you want to jump in here from your work in the media lab, you know, what are your thoughts on kind of the metaverse? And you sent me a video of doing VR stuff at Emory back in 2008. So I'm just going to give him his street cred for putting us on the map early, sir, when people probably thought you were a little crazy.
Yeah, we had actually the first international conference on virtual reality in 2008. I wanted to make sure we don't just take a standing start where we are today and a very short horizon looking forward, some of the challenges. I've been in the space of sensory immersion for quite some time. Even in the late 80s at Harvard, I was working on telepresence and stereoscopic lenses, merging in with flight simulators and so forth that were. So we started learning about those experiences that Dr. Morris is talking about. Amazing things that people with handicaps that maybe couldn't walk could find a space that they could walk in and live extensions of the life of aspects of their life that they were missing. And as she also mentioned, people that are tall have a very different experience than people that are small. And so one of the things with telepresence, we let people that were tall know what it was like to be small. So you could, with telepresence, you could change and let people experience things that were beyond their experience, but they were curious about, related to their behaviors, not just immersion, but looking at the dimensions of curiosity. I took President Carter into Second Life. I built an island in 2007, and it still exists, by the way. If you want to go to the island, it's still there. I took President Carter in, and it was interesting because, I mean, he called me up to come over because he was curious about what virtual worlds would be like, and took him in because he wanted to see what the possibilities were for full immersion in different environments. And you had islands in there that were based on literature. So there was Beowulf Island, so you could live in live the Beowulf poem and other things that was very intriguing to people. And as Dr. Morris says, also, the students are engaged in building. I held possibly the first full class in a virtual world in Second Life in 2008 as well. And the students build things with prims. And it's amazing when you start to release the activities that release their creativity in new contexts, not just the context they're familiar. So for example, a person who built buildings, hotels, built some of the buildings on my island. And I asked why he wanted to spend that time, because he was so expensive otherwise. And he said, because there's no physics here. He could invent his own physics and design the world the way he wanted it to, and leverage new realities in doing so. So we start learning a lot of those things, even back at that time. We started learning, like Dr. Morris is talking about, you look at avatar behaviors. How do your behaviors translate in different ecosystems and environments as well? And as Shayne's talking about, a critical aspect is that interoperability, the ability to have markup languages that allow you to gateway and move from one world to another. Because we keep using the term metaverse, but most of us, as Amelia Schaffner mentioned in the comments, we are referring to a single universe that they're operating in. But the power comes in being able to look at quantum entanglements and entanglements as well, from one place to another, and moving artifacts as well as avatars from one place to another. The creativity is legion in those spaces. We looked at behaviors like what the psychologist looked at, elevator effect. When you go into an elevator, you don't stand right up against the person next to you. You just don't do that. Do you do that in virtual worlds? And you see people's behavior, how when they're conscious or not conscious about it. How do they give space? Do you have social space? And do you translate behaviors from one place to another? Dr. Morris was also mentioning about visualization and navigation. Chemistry, molecules writ large, where you can soar through knowledge space, knowledge networks, and look at how things are connected and touch and connect. It gives you a whole new perspective on looking at it. As she said, it doesn't replace the glass bottles in the chemistry lab, but it augments it in significant ways that can give a very different understanding as well. And that building element and unleashing creativity is amazingly powerful.
Anyone else want to add any comments? We have some interesting questions in the chat going back to this whole notion of property in, the metaverse,
Nicole?
and why you would go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just going to jump in, but finish the question, because maybe I can.
Yeah, no, let me go back to it. it maybe got answered. It was just really the notion of why do we need to even sort of now have these like finite resource kind of modalities getting transferred over to Meta, right? Like if you're thinking of ownership, then getting privatized in a space that's supposed to be open and virtual. They seem to be a clash of thoughts.
Well, it's interesting because we talked about NFTs first, and now we're talking about, metaverses and virtual worlds. And the glory of NFTs is ownership and rights and owning. But, the idea of the internet has always been free and, roaming around. And so this NFT, like, oh, it's mine and who owns it? And this whole economy, is being laid on top. And that's true. When the person asked like, why would I want to have my virtual land next to somebody else's to have it be more valuable when I can teleport from one land to the other? It doesn't really matter. But there's just this whole thing of clout. And also you can, land is just a file in the virtual world, and you can create more and more and more and more and more and more and more land. So there's a tension here, I don't know the answer to this, but these are the tensions that are being pulled. And so that's why you hear people talk about NFTs and the metaverse at the same time, because as we're building worlds, we want to trade in it and own in it. And it's a beautiful thing and a pretty horrible thing. And I think that, how we build this and what we do with this, and back to Dr. Greene's point, we're starting to see the money consolidate and the ownership consolidate back to the techno and the financial, organizations again. So I'm just sort of problematizing this whole space, even though I love the whole space.
I'm with you. I can see the warts and see the beauty all at the same time. All right, yeah, we've got, and let's see, Dr. Morris and then Professor Greene next.
I just have a question that I wanted to piggyback on, and maybe Elizabeth can even answer, or any of the other panelists, in terms of the whole notion of real estate in this metaverse. So for me, that means that perhaps so we have a digital twin campus of Morehouse, right? Like, so does that mean that there's like a digital twin of everything in this world that has been built, and now people are buying access to, like, so like my property, because this could be on, like, Google Maps has everything, right? So like, just say for instance, there's like a digital replica of that. I know, I can't remember who it was at the AWE that was talking about it. Qualcomm, maybe perhaps talking about, no, who does Pokemon Go? Niantic, they were talking about augmenting the entire world and having had that background of helping Google lay their, map, or Google Earth, or whatever the case may be. But I'm not so well versed in this whole real estate transactions, but I do know that people are purchasing, and it's like, how do you protect your own property from being purchased in a digital world? Like, could someone just like be living in your space? Or like, how do countries protect their like national monuments, like the Statue of Liberty? Like, can that be purchased, or that kind of thing? How is that, even though we don't want any regulation, like how is that being regulated to protect governments from losing property that belongs to them per se, but now it's in this digitized world? And so it's like, oh, but it's not yours anymore. Like, we do what we want to with the White House. You know what I'm saying? Like, because I paid enough money to own the White House.
Should somebody use the example of Superworld? Elizabeth, maybe, do you want to describe Superworld to her?
Well, yeah, I think that what we're talking about, the interoperability, is so important, because one person's building Decentraland and one person's building Sandbox, and are they going to merge together? And I know Meta is thinking a lot about all of this, probably. But then there's there's a company called Superworlds, which wants to be the augmented reality layer on top of the real world. So it's like buying airspace, over a piece of property. But another super world could come around, it could be called, Mega World, and they could put it on top too. So, these things are happening, and it's like this platform economy and these blockchains, and everybody wants to be their own nation and their own platform and their own, community and their own. So there's a lot of work for all of us to do and figure out. I'm sure other people have statements.
At some point, there's going to have to be some type of unification that occurs here, right? Like, I just really feel like right now it's kind of like the Wild Wild West, but at some particular point, there's going to have to be some type of unification where we come together and create one unified force where everyone can exist. I mean, the internet has different browsers that you can access it from, but you can still access, the same types of information. So then, like, how can we create this as a metaverse, as this embodiment of then what the internet is? Like, I was watching a tutorial about sandbox and building worlds in sandbox, and I think one of the educators was saying, oh, well, in sandbox you can create digital assets, and the digital assets you have in sandbox are automatically NFTs. And I was like, now wait a minute. So, like, I mean, everybody's gonna have an NFT. Like, then what makes it non-fungible? You know what I mean? Like, what makes it so unique? Is it just that you're just minting everything on the blockchain?
Well, just one quick comment to that, Dr. Morris, is that, you have a glass at home, a cup that you use to drink water out of or whatever. Well, that's yours. It's a tiny, tiny little thing. It's not worth very much. I'm not supposed to steal it from you. So it's yours and it's non-fungible. So just think of that mentality to everything in the digital world.
And one way to think about this also, Dr. Morris, is I can buy your building in the super world and start putting up advertising in that virtual world for Clark Atlanta right down the street and say, don't go here, go over here. And so, yeah, the question is how rights project in some of those domains. We've got a lot to deal with, and replication.
I'll be in touch, Ben.
Exactly. I was like, more work for the lawyers. Professor Greene.
So I just want everybody to understand that, I come from a perspective of being concerned about people who, traditionally haven't had much of them been taken advantage of. And like it or not, I'm always going to stand there. It's just my mother and all my upbringing said that. And so when I don't know that much about the metaverse, and just in my reading about it, it doesn't seem like anybody knows that much about it right now, right? Because it's something that's just coming together. But I'm just struck by, first of all, these the companies basically that are building these structures. It's a little concerning because they have an absolutely horrific track record when it comes to issues of diversity and inclusion. And I think about my work in copyright, and it took about 20 years for me, and now I'm in demand everywhere, right? I'm like the man, everybody wants to bring me in, but this took 20 years. And if students here, you need to hear that. You need to stick to what you believe. It might take 20 years. It took 20 years for the Legal Academy, and Nicole knows this, to recognize the copyright structures and practices and doctrines have enormously hurt African-American creators. And now that's almost like a mainstream idea, but it wasn't 20 years ago, 25 years ago when I started doing this work. And I feel like we're almost at the same place with the metaverse now. When the Copyright Act was being developed, the 76 Act, our current act, it was over 20 years of negotiations. But the question was, and we got the 1976 Copyright Act, which is the law that governs all the stuff that we're talking about today. But the question was, who was in that room? And from what I can tell, there wasn't any African Americans in that room, and there weren't probably many women and many other constituencies who weren't in that room. And I think that's where we are with this. So basically, this concept of the metaverse is pretty much a massive transformation of our society, right? And nothing that has been said here today doesn't persuade me that the same inequalities that we have now won't creep into that space. And so then the question becomes, what are we going to do about that, right? And how are we going to address that? So I'd like to hear what some of your input is on that.
Ooh, who's taking the baton on that? I know your
Can I
hand
speak
is
a
up,
little
Kelly.
bit to that? I know my hand was up. It wasn't that, but you know what? I love this topic. It's phenomenal. And I'm just going to tell you what I've seen from my experience in this space is that it is more diverse from founders and artists, et cetera, than my in real life experiences, is what I will say, except gender. But I see a lot of racial diversity, national origin. It's very international. So there's a lot of interesting things happening. And there's a lot of opportunity if it's seized correctly. Gender's a different story. And there's a lot of discussion about, maybe only 6% of, crypto owners are women, and maybe only 25% of NFT projects are women led. But the numbers we don't really know exactly what those numbers are. But what I've seen is that women are a little bit quieter. We're just quieter in the space. We're not yelling as much in Discord channels, but we're there, and it's just slowly shifting. But I've seen some amazing stories of various marginalized communities who have created things within NFT space and changed life-changing money, life-changing. One of my favorite stories is from Drift, at Drifter Shoots on Twitter, and his story is just phenomenal. So yeah, it's anecdotal at this point. Do we have to be really careful that anytime there's a profit motive, there's always going to be those bigger conglomerates or players who are going to come in and try and take advantage of that. But because of the decentralization, there's opportunity for that smaller artist, for that special person who has that real raw talent to really have an opportunity to come through and show what they got. If they're just, and it might take that other person to notice it and push them in the right direction, but it'll happen. Going back just a second to property, to virtual world property, and I think we should get away from talking about metaverse and talk more about virtual worlds, digital worlds, because I think when we talk about metaverse, we think of this one thing, and it's not, it's still very split up. So things like Sandbox, Decentraland, you can own plots or parcels, and then you can build on those. And what's being built is really interesting and different and pretty cool. And then there's new ones popping up every day. So I had a student who actually gave us a little tour of Decentraland because he owns some plot. He came into my class and he's like, I own 6 parcels in Decentraland. I'm like, oh, you're my new favorite student. So he gave us a little tour and like, here's what you can do. And here's how we build. And here's the, tech behind it. And it was really pretty cool. Not even close to where Dr. Morris is right now. It's like a whole, she's at a whole different level. But the other part of this, it's kind of interesting. And I think this goes to what Dr. Morris was talking about, was like, can somebody take my house and put it in a digital world and make some claim on it? And no, they're not gonna be able to take a claim on your real house. Could they project it digitally? Yeah, they probably could. And then the other piece of this is we see this happening with real life businesses, and something weird, if you've seen the non-fungible Olive Gardens. So non-fungible Olive Gardens popped up, and they were just pictures from Google of Olive Gardens throughout the US, created as NFTs and minted without the approval of Olive Garden. So it was more of like a fan project, right? And then you can also mint unlimited breadsticks. So I only own a breadstick. But Olive Garden got a little upset about this and threw a DMCA on OpenSea, and OpenSea took the Olive Gardens down. But again, it's then you start having this like little bit of a whack-a-mole because they still exist on the blockchain. So it's really interesting to see existing brands and the way they're approaching this. And Olive Garden is trying to shut that down, but I'm like, from a marketing perspective, you might have been taking the wrong approach. So you really have to look at every single instance and figure out, like, it might have been better to maybe work a licensing agreement out or something like that. And you can see the brands that are coming in and trying to just do a cash grab and let me just, take advantage of this marketing opportunity, and the ones who are building something new. And if you want to learn more about that, I'd say take a look at Time Magazine and Timepieces for the good. And then, take a look at like Adidas is like, Nike's like, Bud Light, we'll see where they do at the Super Bowl. So there's like different approaches, and I think everyone's still learning and trying to figure it out.
I will interject. I think from the brand perspective, they're still in real life kind of version of brand protection and, you know,
For
trademark
sure. I mean,
dilution.
you've got a lot of attorneys like in council going, don't stop. What are you doing?
Trademark
What are you doing?
dilution law hasn't caught up to that virtual Olive Garden. So they're trying to figure out
Right. They're trying to figure out what to do. And they're like, no, no, no. And
what
then, like, what are you doing?
happens
Yeah.
with, you know, I think Burger King a few years ago, there was some fan created something or the other. They kind of rolled with it and they were like,
Right.
we're gonna sort of take it and join with you rather than shutting you down. But it's
And that
hard.
probably is a better approach, at least in this instance, would have been a better approach. But in some instance, it may not be. If it's going to be disparaging to your brand, obviously you're going to try and shut that down.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, you know, for the
This was
lawyers
more of
out
a
here,
celebration. Yeah.
we don't know where it's gonna go, right? Today it starts off with we're chipping away at breadsticks, and then tomorrow someone gets on there and talks about all the gluten in those breadsticks, and then you're in a dumpster fire, and you're
That's
like,
true.
who let that continue, right? Like all of folks who either work in-house now or been in-house suddenly get the email and it's like, Nicole, did you know about this? Did you let this go? And you're like, it was a happy time when we first thought about it.
It's definitely challenging, but I don't think it's that different from what we've seen before, right? It's just a new whack-a-mole. It's just a new place where this is popping up, and then we just have to adjust our conversation.
Yeah,
You know,
no. So
it's
it's
the
hard
same.
to try to like discern where you want to police and put guardrails up about how people are engaging with your brands for sure, for sure. Dr. Morris and then Nelson.
I'm going back to KJ's, Professor KJ's comment about, you know, looking at the way that Blacks have been exploited per se in certain spaces. And this was something that we captured and talked about when introducing IP curriculum through Morehouse, you know, talking about why historically Blacks don't file patents and don't, you know, like copyright their work and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that as diverse as people think the industry is, when I go to conferences around XR industry and there's like 4,000 conference attendees, all of which are either Caucasian or perhaps Asian, and no one in the audience is Black, literally like that to me is a signal, especially when you're showing emerging technologies. There's like 20 to 25 Black people out of 4,000, and all of the Black people were speakers. So we're all subject matter experts in order to be there, be on stage, use our ideas and abilities. But like the conference itself doesn't have any Black student attendees. That for me was a red flag. I have spoken about that, but when building a talent pipeline, I'm very protective of my students in terms of their intellectual property, in terms of their capabilities, because a lot of times institutions want to come to an HBCU and they want to farm what I call talent. And my thing is, this isn't the place. Like coming through me to do it is not going to happen. I'm really protective of my students and I really push them towards enterprise. I really think that students should be innovators. I think they should use their creative talents and abilities to become entrepreneurs. I think that we don't have a lot of support in that area, but with the open space of the metaverse, why not try it first? But the problem is Black people don't have generational wealth to support them, nor do they have the eyes of certain VC, you know, or corporations to really support their entrepreneurial efforts. And so then it flounders, and they can't risk putting themselves in financial jeopardy or their family in some type of state of poverty again to, you know, to try out an idea that may or may not hit. So they then go and they see their ideas being integrated in creating more money for companies that they work for, and now they have no access to their own intellectual property, and it is disheartening and discouraging. And then, you know, you have a whole cycle of, wow, I could have done that on my own, but I really just didn't have the support. And I'm not trying to make excuses, but the reality is that Black people need money and they need mentorship. And I mean good mentorship, and they need people who are willing to invest in their ideas, because they will invest in their ideas when they are working for their company, as long as it's increasing their bottom line. And that isn't fair. You know what I mean? I saw some young kids that were literally at these particular conferences that were being pitching ideas, and it was something that I've seen my students do in terms of design and CAD design and 3D designs and all that kind of stuff for a long, long time. And they were getting like $15 million to start their company. I mean, to watch a little furry run around in the room in a circle. And that's been a student project for like 10 years at Morehouse. I mean, I'm just saying there are things that are happening in spaces, but because our students have a lack of knowledge, exposure, and don't know. But I'm the whistleblower here, because I'm the one that's like, hey, look, pay attention here to this emerging technology space. Pay attention here to how to develop. Find out as much as you possibly can about business and align yourself with everything in XR that is going on now. I don't care if you are going into medicine, make it relevant to XR. If you are going into, you want to do sales and marketing, guess what? You need to be working in XR industry. There are so many ways in which this can align, and I want them to get out of like a college degree just isn't going to do it anymore. For me, a PhD isn't even enough. I got 3 very nice degrees and some business skills and a teaching credential. And if you see me grinding in this space, it's something there. So I urge everyone to think of ways in which you can also support our historically Black colleges and universities and our Black students and Black people in general. You know, I hate to bring up the word reparations, but when you think about reparations, knowledge, exposure, and access, okay, that is what really levels the playing field. Education is the great equalizer, but education definitely is not enough. There has to be more, and it's going to take a gargantuan effort. You know, we've always come together around issues that are important, and social justice issues now are just blaring globally, right? And especially in our country. And we need to have that support in all sectors and in all spaces to help generate the type of quality of life that we need. Or else, like I said, you're going to be playing with your toys behind a gate, because you're dividing wealth in this country to a place where you're going to be behind a gate. You're going to have a little small sector of the world, and the rest of the people are going to be mad, poor, impoverished, hungry, and mad, okay, on the other side. So it's okay to play with your little shiny toys and to have your headsets and everything like that, but it's not okay when it's increasing a huge economic divide. So you have to think about accessibility, you have to think about humanity, you have to think about how to make access and exposure to this type of technology and this type of knowledge for everybody, and let the chips fall where they may. Some people are going to latch onto it, but they can't say they didn't know. They can't say there wasn't a pathway. And so that's it. I'm off my soapbox, but I think that is really, really important. Until we can unite the metaverse, and that is my plug, unite the metaverse, then, you know, we're doing a disservice to everyone. And that goes not just for Black people, but even neurodiverse people. I'm talking about, because I have a son that has autism. How does he access this world? So I'm an advocate for those who are neurodiverse, but also those who have physical disabilities. What if you are blind or deaf, or you have some type of other physical disability? How then do you access it? So thinking about accessibility and thinking about ways that we can make this open for all people. So when we talk about accessibility or diversity, we're talking about representation on every level, the young child all the way to the elder, because elders are going to have to be safe in this environment. So when we don't want to regulate certain things, and then you have your mom and dad losing everything that they had because someone said send them this via crypto, and they felt like it was, oh, if it was on the computer, then it had to be real. All of that is an issue. So we have to create safe spaces for our most vulnerable people. And so I urge everyone to start thinking about that when they think about the legalities and the real issues that could come to place here in this space.
Thanks for that, Dr. Morris. Thank you so much.
That was good.
And I'm sorry, you mind if I skip the line just really quickly, just because it builds off what Dr. Morris said.
Of course.
And it's how we're kind of looking at our products, how we're looking at engagements, how we're ensuring that we're getting the products kind of to that future generation. And it's not purely from a it's not from a, this is a future consumer perspective. This is, we want to get access to these technologies so that these folks are aware of really kind of what's going on within this Web 3.0 space, and they're getting access to the tech that's really going to build that's part of the building blocks for the future of what they're going to experience, right? So the partnership with Dr. Morris at Morehouse, and we obviously providing devices to elementary schools. I'm on the board of Ron Clark Academy. We provided some devices to them as well, and we're providing engagements to ensure that we're getting hands in students that are getting access to this technology at a very young age, right? And we hope to be kind of the future engineers or the future folks that are working at Meta or different companies that are really kind of sustaining and building the building blocks for the future. Something else that we're really taking into account is we have a VP of Civil Rights, and he has a team. Our VP of Civil Rights, we're in Austin, and they are involved in every aspect of kind of what we're doing and developing in the future. So they are working directly with our product teams and considering our products from every lens, from differently able to racial diversity, and just making sure that our products are overall inclusive. And I think also to Dr. Greene's point, which he made earlier, and I commend you for kind of all the work that you've done in the copyright space. And it saddens me that it's taken so long, right, for some of these issues.
Just me, or did we lose some of
No,
Shayne's
Shayne
audio?
froze up. Shayne froze up.
We lost him. He had to go to the metaverse, I guess.
All right. Well, we're gonna keep the line open for him to come back. But I see Nelson and Juliana, you guys had your hands up. We're closing in on the final 8 minutes. I think he'll rejoin. Okay. Whoever wants to go first, Nelson, Juliana. Oh, Nelson, you're muted.
I said I'll try and be succinct here, but I really like Professor Greene's point because I kind of think it speaks to human nature. And what I like to think of when I think about future technologies and where humanity is going, especially enabled by technology, is people, when they're excited about it, want to say we're headed towards Star Trek, right? We're gonna have this one world government and it's gonna be great, and we all wear these cool outfits. No, we're heading towards Star Wars. And of course, I have a preference for Star Wars over Star Trek and sci-fi, and maybe that's the depressive realist in me, I don't know. But you have the Star Trek Wars universe is interesting that you have cutting edge technology that's leveraged by powerful people, and then you still have like junkyards on desert worlds, right? And so there is a big risk here of replicating the same kind of power structures and disparities as part of a land grab. And it's especially problematic in the crypto space, which is bleeding into the metaverse. And of course now big brands are involved and everything else. It slightly changes power dynamics. It's a little personal for me. I'm Puerto Rican, and back in 2018 there was a group of like Bitcoin entrepreneurs, basically just early investors, who said they were going to build Cryptopia in Puerto Rico, in this island that's been overlooked for so long. And it was right after Hurricane Maria, which is awful, and everything else. And they more or less came in with their economic clout and threw their weight around, right? And it's like, well, that's not building together. I really like what Dr. Morris said, like, let's unite the metaverse, right? And theoretically, maybe we have the technological tools to do it in a slightly more equitable way, with decentralization and permissionlessness. But it's easy to be pessimistic at times. So that's all I've got to say about that.
That was perfect. Yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely the sort of savior mentality among some of the privileged community that, we've got to swoop in, but they're really not trying to unite. They're really trying to profiteer. So that is very disturbing. Juliana.
I don't want to bring it down, but I want to just give everybody a couple thoughts as we're closing up here about predictions and what's coming. From the legal perspective, from the practitioner perspective, and from someone who's practices in both Maryland and the DC area and in other parts of the country, including Georgia, I stay close to the regulators, and I have a lot of friends who are drafting policy, right? Who've come through law schools like the one I went to. And so I can tell you that 2022 is going to be the active year for the federal government to really muscle in both the regulators we've seen in the administration, but also Congress. And so we saw a few different bills last year that were proposed that were a little bit more robust, a little bit more mature, but still we're not going to see, I think, the same raft as we're going to see this year in the sessions. And so for the time being, here's what I recommend to all those who are trying to build in this space, who might be either wanting to buy or build. We are recommending that if you're going to do any kind of fractionalization of NFTs, that you consider them as securities and how you treat them, sell them, buy them. And so if you're going to be a platform that is going to be selling fractionalized NFTs, and you have to think of them as a securitized asset, then we need to talk, or you need to talk to a lawyer about how you can avoid being an exchange or potentially a broker, and then also the registration requirements for exemptions that you might need to consider if you're a marketplace. And so also the token safe harbor proposal from the SEC Commissioner Pierce, our crypto mom, as she's been dubbed on the SEC Commission right now, we're going into an era with a new chairman. So we've got Gensler, we've got a new voice, we've got a new philosophy for how the SEC is going to approach all digital assets and digital activities. And so far, Gensler wants to wade in from what he said. He wants to get the SEC to be one of the dominant regulators in this space. And so whether or not a voice like Pierce is going to be one that is friendly to just widespread development and allow things like the token safe harbor for rapid trading of tokens like NFTs, and not treating them for a period of time where they're not going to be treated as securities, so that your platform and the operation of them can get off the ground and they can have a value in platform that isn't just based on the speculative external secondary market sale value. Really important time. We're watching this very closely. I think all of us need to watch this closely. And if you have access to lobby and you care, please talk to anybody or any pathway that you can. And then last thought is, where are NFTs going? We talked a lot about IP and title that they can hold on to, how they can protect authors and artists or not. We talk a lot about how they trigger other actions. Some of the areas that I'm seeing in my practice that are of great interest in development now is, for better or worse, going to our thoughts about who's going to be protected and how. Data tracking. NFTs are a great vehicle for data tracking. Going back to my first thought about this is perpetual. Imagine a world where we're enabled to track corporate and consumer behavior with NFTs forever. And there's a permanent record of your activity and purchasing as a corporation for compliance purposes or as an individual forever. This is something that we as lawyers, but also as business owners and developers, need to think about a lot more as we move forward into this new era. So last thought is good stuff. Identity authentication might be resolved. I'll drop that mic and let it sit.
Ooh, we've got about
Nicole, if I
90
can just
seconds.
add one thing
Yes.
to what Juliana just said. I just encourage everyone to take a look at Coinbase had put out a proposal a couple months ago about a completely, like basically proposing a separate regulatory body completely. So just something to consider as well.
There was a comment from someone in the audience. I don't think I can unmute you, but Chris, if you want to put your question in the chat, we'll at least try to get it in our last closing 30 seconds. Oh, and look, Shayne, you made it back before we closed out. We're gonna give you, I can't be like Auntie Maxine and reserve my time, but I can give you, I can give you about the last 35 seconds.
And this is me. So yeah, sorry. Maybe I said the wrong thing. Maybe Big Brother was watching. But I think overall, I think the point I was making is that overall the goal is to ensure that we have as many diverse voices in this space as we possibly can. And I'm proud to kind of be in this space, and I know there's a lot of other folks that look like me and that are from different backgrounds, including gender representation that are in this space. I think at a much earlier point than it probably was, within some other spaces. Still a lot of work to do. Completely agree with the point Dr. Morris mentioned with respect to VC funding. Still not very diverse, and we're still not seeing as many diverse funders, diverse people in the space getting funded, even though the ideas are very similar. Sorry I got kicked off, but yeah, just want to make that point. Please, get involved in the space, and we just love to see more diversity here.
Thank you. We're going to use it as our closing remarks. Listen, this was phenomenal. For those of you who stayed on for like the entire ride, thank you for joining us and staying with us. We will send you the recording. We have your data from registering for the conference. We'll try to figure out a way to transcribe the chat because there was a rich discussion and links and content. So we'll capture that and send that off to you as well. I echo Shayne's comments and really everyone's comments. Unite the metaverse, get involved. It's not going away. I had someone try to tell me NFTs is the thing that's no, it's scary in what it can do, but it's not going away. Get educated, get involved, and stay humble. Thank you to the phenomenal speakers. Man, you guys brought fire today, everybody. I would love to stay in touch with you all, so you'll be hearing from me. Thank you. Have a good afternoon. Have a good weekend. Stay safe, everybody. Bye. Mwah, mwah, mwah.